Chapter 10:18. Long Qingying leaned against the wall and moved her right hand, circulating the energy that had just been recovered in her body. Previously, because her energy was exhausted, she could not maintain the metallization on the surface of her body and was hit by a bullet and passed out. Originally, as long as she woke up and recovered some of her energy, she would be able to squeeze out the bullet control. She did not expect Kong Qingming to take out the bullet for her while she was unconscious. Now that there was no bullet in her wound, she drank the potion brought from the base and recovered a little bit of her energy. With this energy, her wound was rapidly recovering. After drinking a few mouthfuls of water and eating the last piece of homemade compressed biscuit, Long Qingying had the strength to stand up and walk. Kong Qingming was walking in front at this time, observing the surrounding situation. The two walked out of an alley and leaned against the wall to observe the surroundings. There are energy fluctuations over there. The airflow is very strong, seems to be the wind element. Kong Qingming said after sensing the surrounding wind direction and the energy contained in it. It was a little far away, so they could not hear anything. But the wind in the surrounding area was very strong, as if it was caused by someone. Then it's not one and the others. Long Qingying's eyes were slightly gloomy. Her energy had only recovered a little, so she could not sense the energy fluctuations in the distance at all. Hearing Kong Qingming's words, she could only guess. After all, Lin Wenwen and the others did not have the wind element ability, so it might not be them. Kong Qingming thought about it, suddenly appeared on the roof next to him in a flash, and carefully sensed the energy fluctuations in the distance. The fluctuations are so strong, there might be a battle, and we haven't confirmed whether the wind element is friend or foe, and who their opponent is. Let's go and take a look. After Kong Qingming jumped down, he helped Long Qingying walk forward. He said, the two had abandoned the car that they had escaped in before, and now that they did not have a car, they could only use their ability to fly or walk on their feet. So in order to save energy, they had to walk forward step by step. But the two had not gone far when they suddenly heard the sound of a car engine nearby. Kong Qingming immediately pulled Long Qingying to hide, and then secretly observed who was driving the car. He did not just walk, he also left a secret signal. If the people from Sea City appeared, they would notice the secret signal and come looking for them. However, Kong Qingming wasn't sure if anyone from Sea City would appear here. After waiting for more than 10 minutes, they saw two modified off-road vehicles slowly driving over. Kong Qingming breathed a sigh of relief when he saw the way the soldier was holding the gun and the clothes he was wearing. The car was indeed a Sea City car, but the higher-ups still needed to confirm it. It's fine, we're on the same side, Kong Qingming said to Long Qingying, then turned around and walked down from the roof. With a wave of his hand, the mutant trees on both sides of the road immediately moved to block the two cars. It's the vice leader. After seeing that it was the branches and leaves of a tree that stopped their car, the people in the car breathed a sigh of relief. They put away their weapons and waited for the person they were looking for to appear. After appearing with Long Qingying, Kong Qingming immediately said to Li Yushan, "Is there any food? Give me some." Li Yushan immediately took out 2 packs of compressed biscuits and threw them to him, asking, "Why are there only 2 of you? Where are the others?" Kong Qingming gave a pack of biscuits to Long Qingying while opening one for himself. As he ate, he replied, "We were ambushed by the people from Wuxia. The enemy's firepower is very strong. We don't have enough ammunition and manpower, so the only ones who escaped were me and her, as well as Lin Wenwen and Leng Xiantong from Universal Base. We were separated from them, so we don't know their current situation. However, the people from Wuxia didn't come for us, so they should be chasing after Lin Wenwen." Li Yushan frowned and said with a solemn expression, "Why would the people from Wuxia suddenly appear? From the looks of it, the other party came prepared. How strong are they?" Kong Qingming found a stone block to sit on and said, 2 rank 6 metahumans came. The rest are all rank 5 metahumans. There are about 200 to 300 of them, divided into more than a dozen batches. Each batch has 3 modified vehicles, and their firepower is very strong. Seeing that the other party fired at us without asking for money, they should have brought a lot of ammunition. As for why they suddenly appeared here to besiege us, it's probably because they received information about our mission this time. They aren't going to make a big move, but that doesn't mean they won't make small moves. Li Yushan frowned slightly and did not say anything. After Kong Qingming ate and drank his fill, he asked them why they came. Why are you here? Did the leader send you on a mission? Li Yushan immediately replied. The leader asked us to inform you to go back. He already sent a batch of people here last week. Didn't you notice? We were the second batch of people sent here urgently. Kong Qingming was stunned. If a batch of people was sent to find them last week, they should have arrived long ago. However, they did not encounter anyone from Sea City. It seemed that they were discovered and killed by the people from Wuxia. Li Yushan looked at the others, then suddenly went forward and put his hand on Kong Qingming's neck and pulled him to the side. After putting some distance between them, he said, "The leader's son will be 1 month old in 2 days. He wanted to ask you to end the mission early and go back for a drink." Kong Qingming's expression immediately changed, and he stared at him as if he had seen a ghost. What? Son? Where did this son come from? Fuck. If Great Leader Wu had a son, what would happen to Lu Tiany's sister? Was Great Leader Wu going to give up? But didn't he pester them and refuse to give up? Wait, son? Full moon? Kong Qingming's head hurt. So this Great Leader Wu had been secretly plotting while chasing after Big Sister Lu? He even had a child. Then was chasing after Big Sister Lu just a cover? So everything Great Leader Wu said before was a lie? Kong Qingming suddenly thought that if Lu Tiany knew about this, he would probably think of how to put a sack on Great Leader Wu and beat him up. Of course, this was very difficult. Looking at Kong Qingming's expression, Li Yushan also smiled. He enjoyed looking at the other's expression, as if he had seen a ghost. But he didn't know what was going through Kong Qingming's mind. He only thought that Kong Qingming's mind must be filled with a bunch of grass mud horses. He thought about how he had the same reaction when he heard the news 2 days ago. Guess where the child came from? He didn't intend to immediately reveal the special identity of the child, so he kept it in suspense. No one would have thought that as the female leader of the zombie base, she could give birth to a lively baby. Kong Qingming immediately slapped him on the shoulder. Don't keep me in suspense, hurry up and say it. You'll know when you go back. But other than me, no one else here knows about this. You have to keep it a secret. Li Yushan smiled and took his slap. Then he led him to the group as he spoke. Chapter 1019. We have to find Lin Wenwen and Leng Xiantong before we can go back. We can't just leave them behind. Kong Qingming said to Li Yushan. Li Yushan nodded and didn't object. After all, they came out with them, so they had to be brought back. The other brothers. Li Yushan's eyes suddenly dimmed. Kong Qingming's face also darkened, and his aura became gloomy. He was silent for a while before saying, "One day, we will get revenge from those Chinese people." The brothers he brought out this time didn't die under the claws of mutant beasts, zombies, or mutated plants or poisonous insects, but they all died in the hands of those Chinese people. Their Sea City wouldn't just sit still and let them beat them. One day they would get revenge. Hearing his words, everyone was silent. Kong Qingming suddenly walked to Long Qingying's side and put an arm around her waist. He said to Li Yushan and the rest, Come, come, come. Let me introduce you. From now on, this cold beauty is my wife. You guys come and get to know her. Her name is Long Qingying. Cough, it hurts. Be gentle. You're injured, you'll hurt yourself. Don't use so much strength." However, before he could finish his sentence, Long Qingying elbowed him in the chest, causing him to groan in pain. Long Qingying said expressionlessly, "Don't listen to his nonsense. There's no such thing." "TSK." Kong Qingming looked at her with some dissatisfaction. After thinking for a while, he suddenly pulled her to the side. "What are you doing?" Long Qingying stared at him unhappily, but her feet were pulled away without any resistance. Everyone watched in bewilderment as the two of them dragged each other until they were more than 10 meters away. Li Yushan said with a sullen face, "TSK, not happy. It's fine that Leader Wu and Leader Xiao are no longer single. But this brat can also be single with his looks? That girl has to look at a face that's prettier than her. Doesn't she hate it?" Li Yushan's deputy said to him with a smile. Boss, don't be so sour. You should hurry up too. It's not like there aren't any single women in the base. If you want to find one, do you think you can't find one with your status and power? That's right. If we're not jealous, why are you jealous? Even Vice Leader Kong Xiao isn't jealous. Only you are jealous. The other team members immediately echoed their vice leader and teased their captain. Go, go, go. How am I sore? Which eye of yours saw that? Which one of you said that this kid was going to live with Lu Tianyi? Who is that? If you have the guts, stand up and say it in front of him. Li Yushan immediately bristled and stared at them. On the other side, after Kong Qingming pulled Long Qingying to the side, he directly hugged her domineeringly and pressed her against a nearby tree. You're mine now. You're my wife from now on. What? Do you want to eat and not pay up? Don't even think about getting rid of me. Even if I'm a man, you still have to take responsibility. Kong Qingming hooked his beautiful lips and stared at her with his long and beautiful eyes. When he smiled, he was so beautiful that it was hard to tell whether he was a man or a woman. He was very dazzling and charming. However, Long Qingying wasn't interested in his honey trap. She looked at him coldly and said, I didn't want to find you at that time. You came to me on your own. But now you want me to take responsibility. You can be more thick-skinned. Let go. Kong Qingming hugged her without moving and said, It doesn't matter if you don't admit it, as long as they think it is. After 2 seconds, he fixed his eyes on her. A dangerous light suddenly flashed in his beautiful eyes. He moved closer to her ear and said softly, Maybe, you want to be locked up by me? You'll belong to me forever, and I won't let you go anywhere. You. Long Qingying glared at him angrily. She felt that he wasn't joking, because she could sensitively feel that his thought was real. She didn't expect that he would have such a perverted thought about her. Kong Qingming raised his head slightly and pulled his face away to look at her. He raised his hand and touched her clean face. So don't refuse me. I'm afraid I won't be able to control myself. He smiled like an angel, but his eyes were frighteningly dangerous. His words also carried a strong threat to her. Long Qingying looked into his eyes coldly and said without backing down, I don't care if you can control yourself or not, but I won't promise you. Her heart, which had just wavered a little, was now cold again. This kind of Kong Qingming was too dangerous for her. She didn't know why he suddenly had this kind of thought about her. It was just sleeping with him once. It wouldn't change anything. Besides, it was an accident. She didn't force him to do that. Besides, it seemed that she was the one who suffered a loss. Why should she tie the other half of her life to him, just because she had sex with him once? Long Qingying thought angrily. She twisted her body and pushed him with her arms. She skillfully broke free from Kong Qingming's embrace and pushed him away. She pushed him a meter away from her and turned to leave. Of course, her movements didn't escape the attention of the dozen pairs of gossipy eyes around. The two of them separated and walked back without changing their expressions. One was expressionless and cold, and the other was smiling like a demon. No one knew what they were thinking. Li Yueshan leaned over to Kong Qingming and poked him. He asked quietly, What's wrong? It seems that you haven't gotten her yet. It's too early to call her your wife. Kong Qingming shrugged and said carelessly, I just wanted you to recognize her face. Anyway, I've already decided that she is. So she is. Li Yueshan looked at him with some surprise. He didn't expect that this man, who was so handsome that he couldn't distinguish between men and women, would be so domineering when it came to relationships. What he had decided was his. If he couldn't get her, he was going to lock her up. What a bastard. Let's go. I just noticed some movement over there. Maybe the Chinese people are fighting with someone. Let's go and take a look. I don't have a car. You guys came at the right time. At this time, Kong Qingming followed Long Qingying to the car at the back and pushed the people in the car to the front. Li Yueshan didn't waste any time and immediately ordered to set off. At this time, the Chinese people, who were surrounded by zombies and harassed by the tornadoes, were holding their guns and shooting at the zombies that were madly rushing to bite them. At the same time, they also had to find the wind zombie that released the tornado. In their eyes, it was a zombie king. It could release 7 to 8 medium-sized tornadoes and control hundreds of ordinary zombies. This was something that even a level 5 zombie leader couldn't do. Previously, when they were chasing after Lin 11 and the others, Mo and Yi Qingxian's main mission was to protect the two of them. On one hand, they couldn't let them get closer, and on the other hand, they couldn't abandon Lin 11 and Leng Xiantong to control the zombie horde to deal with the Wuxia people. More importantly, they couldn't reveal their identity as zombies in front of these people. If the other party sent the news back to China, the consequences would be unimaginable for the base. That's why the people of China still don't know that the two powerful psychics protecting Lin 11 are not humans but zombies. Chapter 1020. Back in Wuxia, Xikongchen received a report. Missing? What do you mean? Dead or captured? Why would they go missing? Can't you find the reason? He looked at the report in his hand, puzzled. Hou Guozhong sat upright on the single sofa next to him and said, "They suddenly disappeared. And the location was not during the operation. They were all resting and relaxing. There was no enemy attack or suspicious activity. The ones missing were all adepts. The soldiers were fine." Xikongchen's brows furrowed. "Only adepts from our base? Or all adepts?" Hou Guozhong answered. "The ones missing were the mission teams heading west. The others are fine. It doesn't look like they're targeting us. Maybe it's Green Mountain Base." Xikongchen sniffed. "You still haven't found the address of Green Mountain Base. You haven't gotten any information yet. How do you know it's them? What about Starfire?" Hou Guozhong shook his head and lowered his eyes. "Starfire Base has no information on them." Xikongchen thought for a moment. "If that's the case, send someone to keep an eye on them." "Yes, sir. Keep a close eye on Starfire Base. If Li Jingye doesn't get in our way, we'll be fine. But we need to make sure he doesn't try anything against us." "Yes, sir. Once our experiment is a success, we'll be the only base in China to rule over the other bases. They'll all bow down to us. Let's see if Wu Qinghua dares oppose us." Xikongchen's calm eyes flashed with fervor. He turned to the door and continued. "It won't just be our base in China. We'll be able to control bases in other countries as well. At that time, the whole world will belong to China. The food chain and resources of the planet will be in our hands." Hou Guozhong looked at him quietly, but didn't speak. Xikongchen quickly retracted the expression on his face and regained his composure as he said, "We didn't get anything from the Qingshan base. What about the Universal base? Did you get anything?" Hou Guozhong shook his head. "Intel on this base is hard to come by. Starbase tried to force their way in, but they never came back. The people who went were completely annihilated, and not a single clue could be sent back to Li Jingye." He wasn't implying that Skyfire's methods were weak, but that there was something strange about the base. Their intelligence network was like an iron bucket. No matter how hard they tried, they wouldn't be able to leak anything to the outside world. Xikongchen didn't care too much about this situation. He said expressionlessly, "Let's drag it out slowly. We have plenty of time. Time will give us the opportunity to discover their secrets. By the way, what's the situation with the operation team from Sea City that went to Lake Tai?" "We've already ambushed and destroyed their team. Other than a few with stronger abilities, the rest have all been killed," Hou Guozhong replied. When he mentioned this piece of information, his tone became a little more confident. At the very least, this information was already half a success. So there are still fish that escaped the net. Xikongchen frowned, dissatisfied. He had arranged for so many people, almost 300 level 5 arcanists, to form a team with a large number of firepower weapons. He wanted to clean up this group of people neatly. In the end, they only had 30 or so people. They weren't as strong as they were, and they didn't have enough firepower. Yet he still managed to escape. This was not the result he wanted. "Don't worry, we're giving chase. They won't be able to escape. There's only 1 6th level, 2 5th level, and 1 4th level adept left. Some of them are injured. We can exhaust them to death. Not to mention our manpower. There are zombies, mutated animals, and poisonous bugs everywhere. Their chances of survival are slim." Hou Guozhong analyzed confidently. At this moment, in the Universal Base, Yuan Tianxing, Lin Feng, and the rest were having a meeting about who should bring Lin 11, Lung Xiantong, and the rest back. Xiao Yunlong's arrival last night had already been communicated to both Yuan Tianxing and Lin Feng. Therefore, even if Lin Xiao hadn't sent the next message, Lin Feng knew to send another group of people to look for Lin Wenwen. Yuan Tianxing had already received the news that China had sent people to deal with Lin Wenwen's group. Yu Shaoxian and Lu Mingsong were obviously not strong enough. Lin Xiao was going to send a stronger zombie to look for them. Unexpectedly, they were ambushed by the underground creatures, which disrupted Lin Xiao's plan. In fact, she had already thought of who to send for Lin Wenwen and the others yesterday, and they would rush over today. But before she could send the message, the underground creatures came out to cause trouble before the sky was completely dark. Do you know who the leader is going to send? I think she'll definitely send Lin Kuei again. At least Lin Kuei knows their approximate location, so it'll be easier to find them. Lin Feng looked at Chiu Lily and Lin Kuei on the other side of the conference table. Elmar was lying in a special ward with one leg raised. She didn't sit here to discuss things with them. Fortunately, Duan Wan and Xin Yuzhen had left Lin Xiao's message when they were sent away in the morning. Chiu Lily usually didn't care about these things, and Lin Xiao was the one who told her what to do. She shook her head to indicate that she didn't know what Lin Xiao meant. Lin Kuei crossed his arms and sat there in silence, but he could tell that there was another meaning in Lin Feng's words. He glanced at Lin Feng and continued to remain silent. After being glanced at, Lin Feng understood that he had roughly understood what he was trying to say. He then continued, "In order for Wenwen and the others to come back before the day after tomorrow, I still intend to invite Mr. Lin to make another trip. Since he came back from there previously, he should know more about Wenwen and the others' movements, so it'll be easier to find them." Lin Feng pointed at Lin Kuei and said, "I'll go too. Although Big Cat is fast in cat form, he can't fly as fast as I can. And those people from China are too despicable. I'm going to meet them. They won't have a good ending if they dare to provoke us." Chiu Lily suddenly spoke. She pouted and looked angry. Light flashed in his red eyes. Not Big Cat. However, Lin Kuei, who had been silent all this while, protested helplessly. He couldn't accept Chiu Lily calling him a big cat. Chapter 1021. Why not Big Cat? Black panthers are felines too. What's wrong with calling it Big Cat? Chiu Lily was dissatisfied with Lin Kuei's protest. Lin Feng nodded. Yes, there's nothing wrong with it. Yuan Tianxing smiled faintly without saying anything, but his expression showed that he agreed with Chiu Lily's words. Lin Kuei. Alright, you're young, whatever you say. Then you two go. The first thing is to bring Wenwen and Lung Xiantong back safely. The second thing is to take care of those people from China. Yuan Tianxing nodded and agreed with Chiu Lily's request. Then let's go now. Let's go, Big Cat. Chiu Lily immediately jumped up after agreeing. She turned around and pulled Lin Kuei, who was still sitting on the seat, out, not giving him a chance to refuse. Lin Kuei was pulled up from the chair before he could react. He only spoke when they were outside the door. Okay, can you let go of my hand now? Chiu Lily, who was walking in front, was stunned for a moment. She looked back at their hands and suddenly let go. Oh, then she immediately turned her head back. Then let's go. I'm a little worried about Sister Wenwen's safety. Lin Kuei, whose ponytail had slipped through his hand, silently looked at his hand that had been released by her. Then he followed her to the elevator and went straight up to the rooftop. Both of them were strangely silent in the narrow space of the elevator. Chiu Lily tugged at her ponytail uncomfortably and twirled it around her fingers. In her heart, she was thinking about the strange numbness she felt when she realized they were holding hands just now. Chiu Lily's face was actually a little hot after she let go of his hand. But she was a zombie now and her face was always pale, so even if she blushed it wouldn't be seen. When she let go of Lin Kuei's hand just now, a sense of loss flashed across his heart, so he unconsciously looked at his own hand. Before he could figure out what was going on, that feeling had already disappeared. Therefore, at this time, both of their thoughts were a little subtle, so they fell into a subtle silence. Chiu Lily looked down at the gap under the elevator door, and her mind was wandering. If she was a human, she would probably hear her own heartbeat. However, she was no longer one, so Qiu Lily couldn't hear it. After watching the two of them leave, Lin Feng turned to look at Yuan Tianxing. Are you really going? He knew that Yuan Tianxing would also be going to Sea City in 2 days to drink a cup of Xiaoteng's full moon wine. But Lin Feng felt that this kind of scene would be very uncomfortable for Yuan Tianxing. Feelings were not something that could be put down so easily. Yuan Tianxing smiled and nodded. It's fine. Xiaoteng is our leader's son after all. Even if you don't do it for the sake of your superior, you have to do it for the sake of our former comrade in arms. Am I that kind of heartless person? Regardless of whether it was sooner or later, she would eventually have to face the fact that Lin Xiao was already the mother of someone else's child. It would be better to accept the blow earlier. Perhaps in this way, he could let go of his feelings for her earlier. Then you have to arrange the time as soon as possible. You are very busy. Lin Feng could only sigh and nod. He looked at him and smiled. Yuan Tianxing looked at him disdainfully. You speak as if you are more free than me. Lin Feng. Alright, he was also very busy. Although the underground creatures did not attack last night, they had to think of a way to protect the base as soon as possible. These things lived underground, and they could dig a tunnel directly under their base at any time. There was nothing that could stop them from advancing. They couldn't possibly isolate the entire underground of the base, right? How could they isolate it? If they couldn't eliminate the existence of the underground creatures, they could only take a step back and think of a way to strengthen the defense of the base. Hopefully, it would be able to stop them. Is there any machine that can store solar energy or lightning energy and then release it? Lin Feng asked with a frown when he thought of the underground creatures. Maybe we need to find something that can restrain them. There are thousands of substances on Earth. Maybe they have a natural enemy. Yuan Tianxing frowned. Aren't their natural enemies lightning and sunlight? Lin Feng asked. Lightning and sunlight are energy substances. I want to talk about physical objects. Although these creatures live underground, they are at least alive. In the law of nature, all things reinforce and restrain each other. I don't believe that other than sunlight and lightning, there are no other things that can restrain them, Yuan Tianxing said after thinking about it. Lin Feng thought about it for 2 seconds and said, There are. Don't we still have our leader's poisonous fire? That's also their nemesis. Yuan Tianxing looked at him coldly and didn't say anything. Lin Feng was embarrassed by his stare. He then coughed softly and said, Maybe there are other things that can restrain them. Plants. Or special metals. Or animals. It's a pity that Lin Hao's research hasn't made any progress. Perhaps he's not good at it. Maybe when Leng Xiantong comes back, he'll be able to find something. We have to capture some experimental subjects too. Lin Hao has used up almost all of the corpse from before. Yuan Tianxing nodded. He obviously didn't object to what Lin Feng said. After the battle last night, when the underground creatures retreated, they even dragged the corpses of their own kind back. They didn't leave a single one for them. Fortunately, they heard that they caught over 10 level 7 underground creatures in the leader's space. They shouldn't have to worry about not having enough experimental subjects. However, they had no idea that the 10 level 7 underground creatures had already been devoured by Lin Xiao. Not even their skin was left. On the other side, Lin Xiao sat on the sofa in Wu Qingyue's living room. He looked at Xiaoteng, who was crawling all over the sofa. He was speechless as he said, You're only a month old, and you can already crawl all over the place. What about the other babies that are the same age as you? Can't you just sit quietly? This child was like an ADHD child. After waking up, he would only sit quietly when he was drinking milk. The rest of the time, he would either crawl all over the bed or the sofa. Fortunately, he didn't like to crawl on the floor. I'm doing this to train the development of my bones. Am I one of those mortal babies? I'm Xiaoteng. Xiaoteng, who was crawling on the sofa with his legs crossed and his 2 short hands, raised his chin proudly. He squinted his big eyes and snorted. Wu Yueling and the other 2 children sat quietly at the side and looked at him. Lin Xiao said, Baby, you're not even a month old. Can you go through normal development? He was so tired. He watched this little fellow crawl all over the place like a cat. Ever since this child was born, he was curious about everything in the outside world. He wanted to touch and look at everything. Ever since he could crawl on all fours, he couldn't stay still. Chapter 10:22. Tungting turned around and sat on the sofa. He leaned against the back of the sofa, crossed his legs, and crossed his arms in front of his chest. He looked at Lin Xiao with a thoughtful expression. Lin Xiao looked at him and raised her eyebrows. Why? Are you dissatisfied? Tungting twisted his face and turned the back of his head to her. I don't want to. Those 1-month-old babies don't know anything. It's not like I don't know anything. Why should I pretend to be stupid? It's fine to pretend outside, but I have to pretend at home. Isn't it tiring? Lin Xiao said. Then tell me, since you know everything, why did you crawl under the bed? It's fine if you crawled in and out by yourself. But why did you ask us to save you when you were stuck in there? As soon as she said this, the other 3 children immediately looked at Tungting with approval. When they were not paying attention, the little guy disappeared in front of them. After looking for a long time, he finally called out from under the bed in the guest room. Tungting said, That's because I heard a sound under the bed. I just wanted to see what it was. Pfft. When Lin Xiaolu heard Tungting's guilty voice, she couldn't help but cover her mouth and laugh. At this time, Wu Qingyue came out of the kitchen with a big bowl of soup. He put it on the dining table with 5 or 6 dishes, and shouted at them in the living room. Come wash your hands and eat. Wu Yiwelling was the first to slide down from the sofa, and ran to the dining room. Lin Xiaolu and Tongtong followed behind, and the 3 children ran to the dining table in the blink of an eye. Hey, you're all gone. Who's going to carry me over? Seeing that his friends had run away, Tungting immediately became anxious. He looked at Lin Xiao, who was sitting motionless and looking at him coldly. He silently withdrew his gaze and thought about it. It was said that women who gave birth to children would become very maternal and very gentle. Why didn't his mother change at all? Have you ever seen a mother argue all day long when her son was only a month old? Lin Xiaolu turned around and said with a smile, Don't you have auntie? Auntie will carry you over. Wu Yiwelling looked back at her brother, who was sitting alone on the sofa, and then at Lin Xiao. Finally, as he walked towards the kitchen, he glanced at Wu Qingyue, who was taking off his apron. Lin Xiao looked at their gazes, then stood up and walked towards little Tungting. Seeing that she was walking towards him, little Tungting immediately sat down obediently and waited for a hug. When Lin Xiao bent down to carry him, they walked towards the restaurant. The food that Wu Qingyue prepared for Xiao Tungting was milk paste and bone soup that had been simmered in milk for a few hours. Xiao Tungting had no teeth, and his digestive system was very weak, so he could only eat liquid food. However, little Tung grew very fast and developed very well, eating well and drinking the energy lake water given by Lin Xiao. This brat had already grown plump and tender. Moreover, his looks were heaven-defying. She had a pair of beautiful big eyes, a bit like Wu Qingyue's when he smiled. His nose was straight, and his mouth and chin were like Lu Tianyu's. His face was round, his head was round, his body was short, and his hands and feet were short. He was extremely cute. Xiao Yunlong had been playing with him all morning, and Wu Qingyue had to chase him away for a long time. Wu Yiwelling took the vegetable leaves that Wu Qingyue had washed from the kitchen and put them on the plate of the big fat rabbit. Then she went to wash her hands and sat back in her seat. Since the appearance of little Tungting, the big fat rabbit had somewhat fallen out of favor. Fortunately, Wu Yiwelling still remembered to feed her little friend. After lunch, Wu Qingyue walked for a while with little Tungting in his arms. When he came back, little Tungting had already fallen asleep. Then he took little Tungting and the little ones upstairs to arrange for them to sleep. Lin Xiao sat in the living room and watched them go up, then went to the door and looked at the few people in the courtyard outside. Come in. Duan Wan, Shen Yuzhen and Xiao Liqing looked at each other, then lifted their feet and walked in. Lin Xiao looked up the stairs and said to Xiao Liqing, He's upstairs, you go wait for him in the study. Xiao Liqing nodded and left immediately. Duan Wan, who was left behind, said, Lily and Lin Kuei went to find Wen and the others. If they can find them, they should be able to come back in 2 days. Lin Xiao was surprised. Why would Lily go with them? I thought she didn't like to travel? Duanwan shook her head in confusion. I don't know. But she's the fastest in the base. With her help, Lin Kuei will be able to find them faster. Lin Xiao nodded. Elmar's foot needs at least 7 days to recover, and Xia Tian needs at least a month. He's in a terrible state, worse than when I first woke up. At least my arms and legs weren't broken. Lin Xiao didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the thought of Xia Tian's injury. Is there anything else? Yes. Shen Yuzhen opened her mouth and handed her a document. This is the latest report from Starfire Base. It's just been delivered to me. Lin Xiao looked at it for a while then frowned. When she was done, her face darkened. Did you find out anything about this person? Shen Yuzhen shook her head. Not at all, it's very mysterious. He's only been in contact with Li Zhengye, no one else. Lin Xiao clutched the document in her hand and frowned. What did he bring back to Li Zhengye? Shen Yuzhen said. We can't find out anything yet, but it should have something to do with the zombies around him. Lin Xiao thought for a moment. You said the man came back from the northwest, then gave the report to Li Zhengye. Then he left for the northwest in a hurry. Could it be that there's something important to them there? It had to be important. Perhaps the man didn't trust anyone else to pass on the information back to Skyfire Base. That's why he had to bring it back, hand it over to Li Zhengye, and then leave. He'd returned in the middle of the night, and left less than an hour ago. It looked like he'd come back in a hurry. There had to be something in the northwest that worried him. Also, Lin Xiao lowered her head and looked at the report in her hand. It read, this man has 6 level 3 zombies with him. Strange aura, controlled behavior, no signs of zombie-like behavior. Initial conclusion, an abnormal type of zombie. The man can control 6 level 3 zombies, and they're not normal zombies either. The information he brought to Li Zhengye might have something to do with these strange zombies. What was he planning? Chapter 1023. An adept no weaker than a 7th level adept had appeared in Skyfire Base with a group of strange zombies. He'd made contact with Skyfire Base's leader without anyone knowing, and then left without a sound. All they knew was that the mysterious man had given Li Zhengye a report, but they didn't know what it was about. It was also the first time the mysterious man had appeared with zombies, so perhaps the report had something to do with them. In any case, there was an element of uneasiness in this affair. Lin Xiao was beginning to realize that Skyfire Base wasn't as simple as it seemed, and that there was something going on behind the scenes. Tell Xie Dong to keep an eye on Skyfire Base, and try to find out what information the mysterious man gave Li Zhengye. Or, let's see what Li Zhengye will do next. Lin Xiao narrowed his eyes and instructed. Yes, sir. Shen Yuzhen nodded. Wu Qingyue, who was upstairs, entered the study and saw Xiao Liqing sitting on the sofa. He walked to his desk and asked, is there any movement in Wuxia? Otherwise Xiao Liqing wouldn't have come looking for him right after lunch. There's been some activity in China, and Skyfire Base as well. Xiao Liqing rose from the sofa and made his way to his desk. He pulled out the chair in front of him and sat down. He placed the report in front of him. Wu Qingyue's lips curled up, but his eyes grew cold. What report? What is Skyfire up to this time? Xiao Liqing answered. It's because of Qingshan Base in the northwest, I think. If it wasn't for the second virus outbreak, no one would have known that there was such a powerful ability user in their base. Wu Qingyue knew he wasn't finished, and looked at him with a puzzled expression. Xiao Liqing went on. You might not know, but Qingshan Base has a 9th level adept. Wu Qingyue's eyes narrowed, and the smile on his lips faded. It took him a few seconds to recover, and then he smirked meaningfully. Oh, 9th level? Since they have a rank 9 Arcanist, why are they still hiding? Because although he's a 9th level adept, he has no intention of expanding his base. It can be said that he doesn't care about the matters of the base. His situation is a little special, Xiao Liqing said as he pointed to his head. Wu Qingyue was stunned. He picked up the documents on the table and asked curiously, what do you mean? Is he crazy? Xiao Liqing sat with his hands on his knees. He looked at him and said, his brain is fine. It's just that his heart isn't too good. His condition is similar to Lingling's, but it's several times more serious. Wu Qingyue suddenly understood and said, you mean he also has autism? So the Qingshan base was protecting him? What does this have to do with Wuxia and heavenly fire? Xiao Liqing explained. Because he went berserk, Starfire and Wuxia got wind of it. Both Starfire and Wuxia were waiting for the 9th level adept to run out of energy. Then they'd take his energy core. That's why both sides have been keeping an eye on the northwest recently. Wu Qingyue narrowed his eyes. A 9th grade energy core is indeed attractive to them. However, it wasn't that simple. If they want to wait for the 9th level adept to go berserk, they'll have to wait. That's right, that's what they're planning. It's just that the 9th level adept has been in a berserk state for several months now, and we haven't seen any ill effects from it. So I'm guessing their plan won't end well in the near future. Unless they want to get rid of the 9th level adept. Xiao Liqing analyzed after a moment's thought. They want to get rid of him? How? There's no way they can beat him. Small weapons won't do anything, but a big one could destroy the core in the 9th level adept's brain. I don't think they'd make a move if they weren't out of their minds. Wu Qingyue's lips curled into a disdainful smirk. Xiao Liqing nodded. Does the Universal Base know about this? Wu Qingyue suddenly asked. The Universal Base he was talking about was actually Lin Xiao. Logically speaking, the Universal Base had some cooperation with the Green Mountain Base, so they should know something about this situation. Xiao Liqing shook his head and said with some doubt, I'm not very clear. At least I don't think Miss Lu's attention is on that side. Wu Qingyue was also puzzled when he heard that. Lin Xiao, who was downstairs, also asked Shen Yuzhen. Has Lan Lu's side confirmed it yet? Shen Yuzhen glanced in the direction of the stairs, then turned to Lin Xiao and shook her head. No, I think they don't want to give up on that person. After all, they can't move that person to central China with the current situation. Lin Xiao nodded solemnly. That's true. The 9th level adept is still going berserk. No one can get close to him. Even if I give the energy lake to Lan Lu and the others, they might not be able to let the 9th level adept drink it. Shen Yuzhen and Duan Wan fell silent. Lin Xiao suddenly thought of something and looked up at her. By the way, ask Xiadong to keep an eye on whether Wuxia and Skyfire have discovered the 9th level adept. After all, their attention has been focused on that side recently. I think they might have already found out. As she said that, her eyes flashed. If that was the case, Green Mountain Base was in a very bad situation. Yes. Go. After the discussion, Lin Xiao waved at them. Tung Tung woke up after sleeping for an hour. Although children get tired easily, Tung Tung was different from ordinary babies. Although his body didn't seem to be in good health, he was more energetic than an adult. After waking up, he rubbed his eyes with his chubby little hands and sat up. He looked at the small table where Lin Xiaolu was writing with Wu Yueling and Tong Tong. Feeling Tung Tung's movement, Lin Xiaolu immediately turned to look at the bed. Seeing that he had sat up on his own, she immediately asked, Tung Tung, you're awake. Do you want to pee? Tung Tung's baby clothes didn't have a crotch, and of course, he didn't wear a wet diaper. But he gradually developed the habit of going to the toilet every time he woke up. Hearing Lin Xiaolu's words, Tung Ting nodded. You two write on your own first. Lin Xiaolu immediately got up and told her two younger siblings who were still learning how to write. She walked to the bedside and picked up Tung Tung to find the toilet. After being helped to go to the toilet, Tung Tung looked at the two sitting at the small table writing. Suddenly, an idea flashed in his mind. So boring. Why don't we ask Mama to take us out to play? Chapter 1024. Hearing little Tung Ting's words, Lin Xiaolu suddenly had a bad premonition and immediately objected. Little Tung Ting, you're so young. Don't go out casually. What if something happens? Although little Tung Ting had grown a little, he still looked very short and small. And what if he bumped into something when he went out? He was so soft he could get hurt easily. And looking at little Tung Ting's small eyes, this little thing must be thinking about something dangerous. He was going to cause trouble. He was so mischievous that he could quarrel with his mother all day long. There was only one baby in the world who could quarrel with his mother when he was just born. My mama is here. What can happen to me? Don't you want to go out and play? I heard that there are a lot of people in the trading hall, and there are a lot of fun things to see. Little Tung Ting said carelessly. When he said that there were a lot of people in the trading hall, His two big eyes lit up, and his face was full of excitement. After all, Lin Xiaolu was just a child. When she heard that there were many people, and there was something fun to see, she became excited. She was also a little moved, but she still looked hesitant. But Aunt won't agree. Thinking of Lin Xiao's cold expression, Lin Xiaolu shrunk her neck silently. I have a way to make her agree, little Tingting said confidently and continued. Besides, my mama is so powerful. She definitely won't let us get hurt. Besides, we're just going out for a walk. Children shouldn't stay at home. It's not good for their character. Lin Xiaolu looked at him speechlessly. You speak as if you're very old. You're the youngest here. Little Tingting heard Lin Xiaolu's words, and knew that she had been moved. On the other side, Wu Yueling looked a little disappointed when she heard that they were going out to play. Children generally like to go to crowded places to play, but she was the opposite. She didn't want to go to crowded places at all. She was afraid, but she wanted to play with Lin Xiaolu and little Tingting. She didn't want to be separated from them, but if they wanted to go to the trading hall to play, she didn't dare to go with them. There were so many people, it was too scary. Wu Yueling looked a little disappointed and confused. She frowned and pursed her lips. Lin Xiaolu was very sensitive to the change of her expression. She immediately said to Tingting, but if we go, Lingling will have to stay at home alone. I don't think it's a good idea to leave Lingling behind. Tingting looked at Lin Xiaolu strangely and said, who said we are going to leave Lingling behind? Lingling is coming with us. Lin Xiaolu said, Lingling will be scared. Moreover, she knew that Lingling had a mental illness. What if Lingling went to a crowded place with them, and her mental illness acted up? Tingting turned his head and waved at Lingling, saying in a childish voice, don't be afraid, we will protect Lingling. Besides, we're just going there to take a look. We'll be with Lingling, so Lingling won't have to be afraid. Little Tingting felt that Lingling could now play with them normally. Her condition had actually improved a lot. However, the child was unwilling to speak, so the next step of treatment, or the next dose of strong medicine was needed. And we're going to leave in 2 days. We won't be able to play with Lingling then. Tingting suddenly sighed with regret. He was clearly a full-month-old baby, but he had to act like an adult. However, his round face and big eyes didn't show that kind of imposing manner. Lin Xiaolu looked at Tingting with amusement. She keenly sensed what he was thinking. Perhaps this would help with Lingling's condition. So she carried him to Wu Yueling and said to Lingling, Tingting is right. We're going to leave in 2 days. Lingling won't be able to play with us for the time being. Why don't Lingling go out with us this time? Sure enough, Lin Xiaolu and Tingting would be going back to the base in a few days. Wu Yueling immediately felt an emptiness in her heart when she was left alone at home again. It was a little uncomfortable. She didn't like this feeling either. Thinking of this, Wu Yueling's resistance to the outside world seemed to loosen a little. She raised her head and looked at Lin Xiaolu and Tingting blankly. Tingting also looked at her encouragingly with his big bright eyes. Lin Xiaolu sat on the carpet next to Wu Yueling and put Tingting down. She let him crawl on the thick carpeted floor, then reached out to touch Lingling's head and said, Lingling, don't be afraid. We'll come to play with you often in the future. And Tingting is your younger brother. You have to be happy and not afraid, so he won't worry about you. Thus, when Lin Xiao sensed that Tingting had begun to toss and turn again, she appeared at the door and was stared at by 4 pairs of small eyes. Mama, take us out to play. Lin Xiao raised her eyebrows and crossed her hands in front of her chest. What? It's not enough to make trouble here. Do you want to go out and make trouble? Tingting rolled his eyes and gave her a cute supercilious look. How am I making trouble? I'm obviously very obedient. Papa said I'm very obedient. Lin Xiao sneered at him and said, You're obedient? If you're obedient, why did you tear the sofa in the guest room in the morning? You even poured water on the bed. You also broke the vase and the cup in his living room. At that time, Wu Chunghua said he didn't mind with a smile on his face, dragged the sofa out and threw it away, and changed the bedsheets on the bed. Then, he calmly cleaned up the mess in the living room and didn't let her do it. Lin Xiao inexplicably felt very embarrassed. Tingting immediately looked at the ceiling. How did he know that his nails could tear the sofa's leather? And he felt that there seemed to be something in it, so he touched it out of curiosity. He didn't mean to spill the water on the bed. It was just that when he was holding the cup of water, his hand slipped for some reason, and the water slipped. He felt that the pattern of the vase in the living room was very beautiful, and wanted to see it. He didn't know who put the cup on the edge of the table. At this time, Lin Xiaolu spoke to help him out and said, "Aunt, take us out to play. Last time we came, Mama didn't take us out to play." Seeing that her little princess had asked, Lin Xiao immediately smiled and agreed to her. "Okay. Get ready, where do you want to go?" At this time, Tungting immediately shouted, "To the trading hall. There are many people there. And Mama, you don't listen to your own son, but listen to Sister Xiaolu. What do you mean?" Lin Xiao calmly glanced at him and said, "You have no right to speak. Do you understand?" Tungting, "Papa, hurry up and take this female zombie away. So annoying." Chapter 10:25. Does Lingling want to go too? After ignoring his son, Lin Xiao looked at Wu Yueling's face. Wu Yueling nodded gently. Lin Xiao pondered for 2 seconds and said, "If you want to go, you have to get your father's permission." Wu Yueling nodded again, then immediately turned around and ran out of the door to find her father. After Wu Yueling left, Lin Xiaolu seemed to be afraid that Lin Xiao would blame Xiaotingting. So she said, "Xiaotingting said that Lingling needs to go to a place with a lot of people. Maybe it will help her get better. We will protect her." Lin Xiao walked over and touched her head. He nodded and smiled. "Yes, you're right. Lingling's condition is a lot better now, and it's good for her to get to know more people. She could have spoken before, but now she doesn't want to." Sigh. Seeing that Lin Xiao agreed with her, Lin Xiaolu immediately smiled happily. On the other side, Wu Yueling ran to Wu Qingyue's door. She first knocked on the door twice, then waited for a few seconds before she opened the door on her tiptoes and poked her head in. Xiao Liqing and Wu Qingyue had already stopped talking when she knocked on the door. Seeing that it was Wu Yueling who poked her head in, Wu Qingyue asked with a gentle smile, "What's wrong? What's wrong, Lingling?" Wu Yueling retracted her head, then walked in while holding the hem of her clothes. She looked at Wu Qingyue hesitantly, as if she wanted to express something but didn't dare to. Wu Qingyue waited until she walked in front of him, then glanced at Xiao Liqing and asked Wu Yueling, "What's wrong?" Wu Yueling reached out and pulled the fabric of his pants, then pointed outside with her other hand. She wanted him to go out. "Lingling wants you to go out?" Xiao Liqing asked in confusion. Wu Qingyue was also confused, then glanced at Wu Yueling and stood up obediently. Seeing that he stood up, Wu Yueling immediately stopped him and walked out of the door. After leaving the study, she dragged him downstairs and saw Lin Xiao and the other 3 children in the living room. Seeing him come down, Lin Xiao said expressionlessly, "Lingling wants to go out with us. I asked her to tell you." "Where to?" Wu Qingyue looked at her with a smile and asked. "Trading hall. Let's show them around. Maybe they can find something useful," Lin Xiao said. "Then I will go too," Wu Qingyue said subconsciously. However, Lin Xiao directly refused. "Forget it. Your existence is too eye-catching. We don't want to be so high-profile." Wu Qingyue saw that her refusal was very clear, so he didn't force it. He said, "All right, I'll prepare a car for you. Come back early for dinner." Then Lin Xiao, Tungting, the 3 kids, Duan Wan, and Shen Yuzhen drove the car that Wu Qingyue had arranged for them to the central trading hall. Every district in Sea City had a trading hall and a mission hall, and the center was the largest one. Traders from all over the base gathered here to trade or sell things. Of course, the value of the items exchanged here was very high. It was also very crowded, and it was very lively with people coming and going. The first floor to the 3rd floor was the range of the trading hall. Lin Xiao had been here before, so she knew where it was. After parking the car in the parking lot, Lin Xiao carried Tungting and the other 3 kids out of the car and walked towards the building. Duan Wan held Wu Yueling with her left hand and Tong Tong with her right. Lin Xiaolu consciously walked beside Lin Xiao, and Shen Yuzhen walked behind them. Shen Yuzhen was not unfamiliar with this place, so she introduced the place to Duan as they walked. The first floor is more complicated and messy. Because there are many people, the value of the items exchanged isn't high. The second and third floors are the large trading hall. The fourth floor is the mission hall. And the fifth floor is the corpse hunter affairs hall. Further up are the administrative offices and other conference halls. The appearance of 3 young women and 4 children in the trading hall would easily attract the attention of the crowd. Usually, most of the women who brought their children out were either from powerful families, or were surrogates who were trying to give birth to their children. However, the former's mental appearance was generally much better than the latter's. Since the latter was a surrogate, they were people who lived at the bottom. Therefore, people who lived at the bottom would usually live a very difficult and sullen life in order to survive. Everyone sized up the 3 women's clothes and the children's clothes. 2 of them were wearing camouflage military uniforms, clean and rigorous. The other was wearing a simple shirt and jeans, which were also clean and neat. Looking at the children, their clothes were also clean and of good quality. They were neither new nor old. It seemed that these 3 women were not people who lived at the bottom. Lin Xiao was still wearing sunglasses, and her long hair was tied into a ponytail. Her face was clean and plain, and her camouflage uniform looked very youthful. But it was slightly destroyed by the baby in her arms. In fact, Lu Tianyu was still very young. She was only 24 years old this year, and only looked old with heavy makeup on her face. Now that Lin Xiao was barefaced all day, she looked much younger. Moreover, her face was fair and she looked tender, and her figure was not bad. After they entered the trading hall, many people sized her up, and the more they looked at her, the more covetous they became. Lin Xiao could feel the hidden meaning of the surrounding gazes, but she was secretly paying attention. Her expression did not change, as she held Xiao Tingting and watched the surrounding trading stalls. In fact, it was mainly a few children who were watching. Xiao Tingting climbed from her arms to her shoulder, sat on her arm, and twisted his waist to look around. He couldn't stop for a second. Lin Xiaolu also looked left and right. She saw that this trading hall was very big, even bigger than what she had seen in the Netherworld King's base. And there were many people. Most of the things on the stalls were daily necessities, some machines, and so on. There were also many people like them, who came and went to watch. Lin Xiao glanced at Wu Yueling, and saw that she had unconsciously tightened her grip on Duanwan's hand. Her body was also very close to Duanwan, and she looked very nervous and afraid. However, her eyes were very clear and calm, and there was no panic in them. The effect was not bad, and it did not cause any fear or panic. It seemed that Xiao Tingting's method could be tried a few more times. Perhaps she would slowly get used to it. Lin Xiao brought the children and Duanwan around the first floor, then went up to the second floor. The environment on the second floor was much cleaner and tidier, and there were fewer people. Just as Lin Xiao was halfway through, a voice suddenly sounded behind her. "Are you Lu Tianyu?" Lin Xiao stopped in her tracks, and the few of them immediately stopped. Then they all turned their heads to look behind them. Chapter 1026. When they turned around, they saw a few people standing behind them looking at them. There was a man and a woman in the front, and 3 men behind them. The one who spoke should be the woman, who looked to be in her 20s. She was staring at Lin Xiao in disbelief and bewilderment, as if she wanted to confirm but didn't dare to. Lin Xiao looked at her quietly, then raised his hand and took off his sunglasses. "Ah, impossible. Why aren't you dead?" As soon as the woman saw Lin Xiao's eyes, she immediately screamed. She stared at Lin Xiao with a frightened expression, and took 2 steps back. The man next to the woman also looked at Lin Xiao in surprise. Just now, when he looked at the woman's back, he felt that it was quite beautiful, but he also felt that it was familiar and strange. He couldn't remember for a moment. However, when he heard his female companion cry out, he looked like he remembered who it was. Then he became like the woman, very surprised and couldn't believe it. Lin Xiao looked at the woman blankly, then glanced at Shen Yuzhen next to her. "Do you know who she is?" Shen Yuzhen looked at the woman and frowned as she thought about it. She said, "She looks a little familiar. I can't remember." Lin Xiao searched through Lu Tianyu's memory, but couldn't remember who it was. It seemed that Lu Tianyu didn't take this woman seriously. What? You don't remember me? I am. No. Now is not the time to talk about this. Aren't you dead? The woman saw Lin Xiao looking at her blankly, and then asked her companion next to her, as if she didn't know her. He immediately ran out excitedly and shouted loudly. The fear and disbelief he felt just now had also disappeared. Lin Xiao saw that she was excited and a little angry, but he felt that there was a feeling of contempt in her emotions. No, it was the feeling of contempt for Lu Tianyu. It was as if she looked down on Lu Tianyu, but she didn't allow Lu Tianyu to not know her. Sorry, my memory is bad. Who are you? Lin Xiao said coldly. After hearing the woman call out Lu Tianyu's name, the people around them all had a look of realization. And soon they began to whisper. No wonder I felt that she looked a little familiar, but I couldn't recognize her. Yeah, I was just wondering which district this beauty was from. Have I seen him before? So it's that Lu Tianyu. But didn't she die a year ago? I heard that he was thrown into the group of zombies. Who is standing here now? Could it really be her? Could it be that she's not dead? Is it really her? But although it's very similar, the temperament is too different from before. Indeed, it's much more pleasing to the eye now. Everyone began to size Lin Xiao up from head to toe with a look of amazement and astonishment. The man looked at Lin Xiao with amazement, while the woman looked at her with a complicated expression of disdain, jealousy, disdain, disgust, and so on. Obviously, when they saw Lin Xiao standing there alive with Lu Tianyu's body, they had already tacitly believed that Lu Tianyu did not die a year ago. He might have been saved or encountered some sort of fortuitous encounter. There were many dangers outside the base, but there were also many opportunities for survival and fortuitous encounters. Maybe this Lu Tianyu suddenly awakened his ability at that time, or someone passed by and saved her or something, so she escaped the disaster. Anyway, now that they had seen her standing here, the news that she died a year ago was broken. Hey, didn't they say that she was killed last year because she offended Leader Wu? If she didn't die, how dare she appear in this Sea City base? That's right. This kind of disgusting woman dares to be shameless enough to take a fancy to Leader Wu, and even threaten him with Leader Wu's precious daughter. If I were Leader Wu, I would definitely kill her and throw her into the zombies to feed. These women looked at Lin Xiao as if they were looking at trash, and their voices were deliberately louder. However, most of the people present didn't know Wu Yueling, so they didn't know that the person they were talking about was right in front of them. After a small number of people recognized Wu Yueling among the group of children, the way they looked at Lin Xiao became unpredictable. The whispers of the people around did not affect the woman who stopped Lin Xiao. After hearing Lin Xiao's words, her eyes widened. Then she suddenly became angry, because she felt that Lin Xiao's words were mocking her. You don't know me? Haha, that's true. Some women rely on their bodies to trade with all kinds of men to obtain the qualification to survive. They only know how to live a peaceful and comfortable life in the base all day long. Why would they look at people like us who struggle hard outside the base? After the woman's anger subsided, her expression changed and she sneered sarcastically. Her words made the man next to her a little unhappy. He frowned and looked at her. Shuer, Bai Shui, also glared at the man with dissatisfaction and said to him, What? Do you want to speak up for her? Did I say anything wrong? As she spoke, she looked at Lin Xiao with that kind of disdainful gaze, and suddenly noticed Tung Tung in her arms. Bai Shui was stunned and suddenly said, I was wondering why you became a little different from before. I almost couldn't recognize you. It turns out that you finally thought it through, and went to be a substitute for someone else? Whose child is this? I don't know if he's healthy. The meaning of her last sentence was that Lu Tianyu had done so many transactions with her body that he might have contracted some kind of disease. How could it be possible for the child to be healthy? Lin Xiao looked at her calmly and asked, Are you done? Then she turned around with Tung Tung in her arms and walked forward calmly. She didn't react to Bai Shui's words and didn't intend to communicate with that woman any further. You stop right there. She didn't expect Lin Xiao to turn around and leave without giving her any face. Moreover, the other party's indifferent attitude made Bai Shui feel like a clown. She subconsciously looked at the gazes of the people around her, and felt that these gazes, which were watching a good show, were aimed at her like needles. Bai Shui felt her hatred rise when she thought of Lu Tianyu's disdain and ridicule towards her in the past. Thinking about it again, she was now a level 4 ability user. Last year, when she was only a level 2 ability user, this woman even used her identity as Yang Chao's woman to humiliate her. Now that Yang Chao was long dead, she was an ordinary woman with no ability or background. Based on what she had done in the past, if she wanted to survive in this Sea City base, her life would be difficult if she didn't find another financial backer. Lin Xiao ignored her and continued to stroll around without changing her footsteps. Tung Tung, who was in her arms, lay on her shoulder and looked back at the woman behind her, then turned his head and ignored her. But Yang Chao has been dead for a year, but you're still alive and well. It seems that you're quite capable. Which man did you hook up with again? Seeing that Lin Xiao was about to leave, Bai Shui immediately walked over quickly. She stared at Lin Xiao and said loudly. Chapter 1027. Alright Shui, don't talk too much. We're here to trade, don't cause trouble. The man beside her said to Bai Shui, and pulled her to the other side. But Bai Shui resisted and shook his hand off. She stared at Lin Xiao's back as he walked further and further away. She suddenly turned around and glared at the man in front of her. What? Do you feel heartache for her? You're just one of the men she once used. She's already a husband, and you still can't forget her? Bai Shui's words not only contained the original hatred, but also a strong sense of jealousy. Her beautiful face became a little twisted, and her eyes widened to the point of almost popping out of their sockets. Pa! After hearing what she said, the man raised his hand and slapped her hard on the face. Then he said to her gloomily, Shut up. Don't think that you're any cleaner than her. At least she's above board. What about you? Bai Shui felt her face go numb from the slap, and her ears buzzed. She was stunned for a moment, and her expression was a little confused. After hearing the man's voice, she shivered all over. She looked up at the man with fear. Her lips moved, but she didn't dare to make a sound. The man looked at Lin Xiao's back as he left, then coldly glanced at Bai Shui. Then he turned and walked to the other side. After hearing the slap and the man's words, Lin Xiao's expression became a little more profound. When we go back, check their identities. Lin Xiao turned to Duan Wan and said softly. Yes. At this moment Shen Yuzhen was surprised. I remember now. But leader, do you really not remember her? Lin Xiao and Duan Wan turned to look at her. Why? Do you know? Shen Yuzhen said. That woman is called Bai Shui, and the man is called Ding Biao. He's a level 5 fire ability user. Their corpse hunting group is a medium-sized corpse hunting group, with about 300 members. This Ding Biao is one of the vice leaders. That Bai Shui seemed to have a bad relationship with you. You even brought people to bully Cough, to cause trouble for her. When she said the last sentence, Shen Yuzhen felt a little awkward, because at that time, the things that her family's leader had done were indeed quite vicious. Of course, she didn't know that Lin Xiao was living in Lu Tianyu's body. Therefore, even if the current Lin Xiao had become a good person, Shen Yuzhen still thought that she was the old Lu Tianyu. Lin Xiao's interest was immediately piqued. He said as he walked, I don't have a good memory, so I might have forgotten. Tell me, maybe I can remember something. Duan Wan also looked at her curiously. Shen Yuzhen said, Actually, I'm not very clear, but I know a little. Didn't she join Sea City base with you? Your memory is really bad. I heard that you guys came in the same team. I don't know what happened before you guys joined the base, but I've seen it a few times. Every time you met Bai Shui at the trading center, you would mock her a little, and your words were a little vicious. At that time, Bai Shui didn't have much power, and she wasn't as pretty as you are. Her background wasn't as strong as yours either. That's why I can only look at you with hatred while enduring your, humiliation. Lin Xiao rubbed her chin and pondered. Hearing what she said, she probably found something from Lu Tianyu's memory. Oh, this Bai Shui seemed to be from the same university as Lu Tianyu, and she was even an alumnus. She was 1 year older than Lu Tianyu. At that time, after they escaped from the school together, they had struggled all the way to the safe base. At that time, there weren't many women in the team, and most of them were ordinary people. His combat power was basically a 5-point battle trash. In fact, this Bai Shui was the same as Lu Tianyu. She had no ability, was timid, and was as selfish as Lu Tianyu. However, Bai Shui could only be considered a little more delicate, and she was much less beautiful than Lu Tianyu. In the beginning, the two of them received similar treatment in the team, relying on men in order to survive. However, because Lu Tianyu was beautiful and had a good figure, his treatment was much better than Bai Shui's. Bai Shui saw this, but she felt that it was unfair. Why were the two of them doing the same thing? But the treatment was so different. Later, they met Ding Biao's team. At that time, Ding Biao was a level 3 ability user, and he was the strongest in the team. In order to survive, Lu Tianyu quickly set his sights on him, and so did Bai Shui. However, at that time, Bai Shui fell in love with Ding Biao at first sight, and wanted to compete with Lu Tianyu for everything. In the end, she still failed. Ding Biao had no interest in her at all, but he was more interested in Lu Tianyu. Later, after entering the base, Lu Tianyu saw many ability users who were stronger than Ding Biao, and immediately kicked him out. At that time, Bai Shui suddenly awakened her ability. Bai Shui, who had awakened her ability, immediately stopped relying on men, but she still couldn't let go of Ding Biao. So after joining the corpse hunting group with Ding Biao, she began to hone her wilderness survival skills and upgrade her ability. Lin Xiao walked with little Tungting in her arms, her eyes calm. No wonder when this woman saw her, she looked like she wanted to, oh no, she wanted to trample Lu Tianyu under her feet. After everyone recognized that Lin Xiao was Lu Tianyu, they were very curious when they saw her, but most of them subconsciously distanced themselves from her. It couldn't be helped, because no matter where Lu Tianyu went, he always looked like he was looking for trouble. And indeed, wherever he went he would cause trouble. Perhaps the surrounding gazes were too obvious, but Lin Xiao and the other adults weren't affected. Lin Xiaolu, Tong Tong, and little Tungting weren't affected, but Wu Yueling began to have some adverse effects. Lin Xiao noticed that Wu Yueling was getting more and more afraid, and her body movements were becoming more and more unnatural. She immediately handed little Tungting to Duan Wan, and bent down to pick up Lingling. What's wrong with Lingling? Wu Yueling shook her head. The surrounding gazes made her very uncomfortable and unfocused. After being picked up by Lin Xiao, she immediately hugged Lin Xiao's neck and buried her face. Lin Xiao looked at the other 3 children. Have you played enough? Looking at the time, it had only been half an hour since they came in. The other 3 children obviously hadn't had enough, but they all noticed that their little friend, Wu Yueling, wasn't in a good state, so they all nodded. Then let's go back early, Lin Xiao said to them with a smile. In the end, the group of 3 adults and 4 children just strolled around and went down to the first floor without buying anything. They prepared to walk out of the building and drive back to Wu Qingyue's house. They didn't expect to be stopped by Bai Shui and the others when they came out of the first floor. Chapter 1028. Lin Xiao frowned. Why are you guys again? Is there anything else? Although she didn't want to pay attention to this strange woman, it was quite annoying for her to stand in front of her. I haven't seen you for a year, but you've changed a lot. I haven't seen you before. You haven't been in Sea City this year, right? Did you join that base? Bai Shui stood in the middle of the road with her arms crossed in front of her chest. She looked straight at Lin Xiao and asked. Lin Xiao walked to the side. She didn't want to talk nonsense with this woman, and was about to walk around them. However, Bai Shui moved and immediately blocked in front of her. Not only did she move, but the people around her also spread out to block the path of Lin Xiao and the others. Seeing this scene, the people going in and out of the place stopped in their tracks and retreated to the side, as if they were watching a show. Lin Xiao's retreat immediately boosted Bai Shui's momentum. She raised her chin and smiled. Don't go. After all, we used to be good friends. We haven't seen each other for so long. Why don't you talk to us? Whose children are these? Bai Shui felt that she was right. Lu Tianyu was in the base, and she didn't know which man she had hooked up with. However, the base was a small base that had just been built. It was said that there were only a few thousand people. How powerful could there be for Lu Tianyu to hook up with? Even if he could, he shouldn't be very powerful. Therefore, the man that Lu Tianyu hooked up with now shouldn't be as powerful as Yang Chao. However, it didn't matter whether the man she was relying on was strong or not. What was important was whether her man was from the base. If you have anything to say, please get out of the way. At this moment, Shen Yuzhen suddenly took a step forward and said coldly to Bai Shuer. From the woman's words, it was obvious that she thought that the man that Lin Xiao was relying on was weaker than before, which meant that she had fallen. Without a powerful background, she would come looking for trouble. Lin Xiao narrowed her eyes and looked thoughtfully at Bai Shuer and Ding Biao, who was not far away from her with a calm expression. Bai Shuer looked around meaningfully, then smiled and said, "This is not a good place to talk. What if we accidentally hurt the children? Let's find a quiet place to talk." As she spoke, she glanced at the children around Lin Xiao and focused on Tung Tung, who was in Duan Wan's arms. As soon as she finished speaking, the men beside her immediately took a step forward, vaguely surrounding the three of them. The meaning behind his words was also secretly threatening them. If they didn't do as they said, they would definitely die. He might have to make a move on a few children. Upon hearing Bai Shuer's words, the surrounding people looked at Lin Xiao and the others as if they were in trouble. Some people looked at Bai Shuer as if she was an idiot. Does this woman want to die? Or does she want to die? Who knows? She can only blame herself for not recognizing the little princess. This Lu Tianyu looks much more beautiful than before, and although her aura is much more restrained than before, it still looks very sufficient. He doesn't look like someone who would compromise. Bai Shuer's words caused the surrounding people's expressions to change, but Lin Xiao and the other two's expressions did not change at all. At this time, Lin Xiaolu suddenly looked up and said to Lin Xiao, "Aunt, let's go. There's a mad dog here, it will bite." As she spoke, she glanced at Bai Shuer with her big eyes. Puffed. The surrounding people suddenly laughed. Seeing Bai Shuer's face instantly turn ashen, they all had an inexplicable feeling of wanting to laugh. They felt that although Lin Xiaolu looked young, her heart was not small. She even knew how to taunt. Lin Xiao smiled and lowered his head to say to her, "It's okay, if a mad dog dares to come, we'll kill it and feed it to the zombies." As he spoke, Lin Xiao raised his head and glanced at Duan Wan. Duan Wan immediately understood. Holding Tung Tung with one hand, she suddenly waved her hand with the other. Aha! With a few muffled sounds, the few men that Bai Shuer brought around Lin Xiao suddenly fell to the ground with a muffled groan. Each of them was holding a leg and moaning in pain. Bai Shuer was stunned for a moment, and suddenly saw her people fall in an instant. Her face immediately changed, and she stared at Lin Xiao, and the rest with shock and anger. Even Ding Biao's expression changed. He squinted his eyes, and his originally relaxed aura immediately became somewhat fierce. "A good dog doesn't block the way. Move aside," Duan Wan said coldly to Bai Shuer. Then she raised her leg and followed Lin Xiao, who had already taken a step forward. Bai Shuer regained her senses, and immediately turned around and pointed at them, shouting, "All of you stop!" But Lin Xiao and the rest ignored her, and continued to walk forward. Just as Bai Shuer was about to catch up, a figure suddenly rushed out from the side and screamed at Bai Shuer. "Bai Shuer!" Everyone's attention was attracted by the person who suddenly rushed out, and they saw that it was a middle-aged woman in her 40s or 50s. The woman's clothes were tattered, and her hair was messy. She rushed to Bai Shuer with a haggard face, kneeling on the ground and hugging Bai Shuer's thigh as she shouted, "I beg you, save my Ainen. Sob, Ainen was injured because of saving you. Ainen needs to go to the hospital now. If you don't send her to the hospital, she will die. Bai Shuer, I beg you to save Ainen quickly." "Yes, but to save you." Bai Shuer was shocked by the woman's sudden appearance, and then she was hugged by her thigh again. She was a little flustered, and anxiously looked at the backs of Lin Xiao and the rest, wanting to chase after them. But the woman's entanglement made her unable to move her legs. She didn't even look at her companions who were lying on the ground. While she pulled her leg, she scolded the woman. "Let go of me. What does it have to do with me? I didn't ask Jiang Anan to save me. She was the one who was nosy and wanted to help, so she got injured. If you want to send her to the hospital, can't you do it yourself? Why are you always looking for me? Let go. Let go. Do you hear me?" But although the woman let go of her thigh, she grabbed her clothes tightly and stared at her with bloodshot eyes. "How can you say that? You guys went out to kill zombies together. Our Anan saved you so many times. I don't need your gratitude. But this time, it was you who asked Anan for help. That's why our Anan helped you. Aren't you the best of friends with Anan? Why are you saying that now?" Hearing the woman's words, the way the people around looked at Bai Shuer changed. They looked at her like she was a bug, and began to point at her. "So that's how it is, this woman is too selfish. Actually, it's normal, who isn't selfish nowadays? But to treat a good friend like this, it's a bit too cold-blooded. So she's this kind of person. We have to stay away from this kind of person in the future. Did you guys see that? Don't trust people so easily, you have to look at people clearly." Chapter 1029. The gazes of the passers-by made Bai Shuer's face turn red with anger. She forcefully pulled the clothes back from the woman's hand and kicked the woman away. "Don't look for me again. Jiang Anan has nothing to do with me." She scolded and immediately chased after Lin Xiao and the others. She glared at Ding Biao beside her. "Why didn't you stop them?" Ding Biao glanced at the woman behind her, and dissatisfaction flashed in his eyes. Without saying a word, he turned around and walked toward the parking lot where Lin Xiao and the others were. Ouch! The woman was kicked a little hard. She was malnourished to begin with, and Bai Shuer's kick had been a little too forceful due to her anxiety and anger. She was lying on the ground and couldn't get up for a long time. She could only watch Bai Shuer and Ding Biao leave together. When they reached the parking lot, Lin Xiao said to Duan Wan, "Find out their background and what's going on with that woman." Then, he put Wu Yueling in the car and carried Tingting up. Tong Tong climbed into the back seat, and Lin Xiaolu climbed into the front passenger seat. She consciously buckled her seat belt. Shen Yuzhen got into the driver's seat. Well, she had always been the driver. Duan Wan nodded and immediately retreated to stop Bai Shuer and Ding Biao. "I'm sorry, my boss has something to do. It's not convenient for me to talk to you, please leave." Duan Wan blocked in front of the two expressionlessly. "Your boss? Heh, she can still be the boss. She's quite capable, but why?" Hearing Duan Wan's respectful tone toward Lin Xiao, Bai Shuer mocked with disdain. Duan Wan knew that this woman should have some grudge with the owner of Lin Xiao's body, but it didn't mean that her boss would be pestered by her. And it seemed that Lu Tianyu didn't do anything fatal to her in the past. She warned, "No matter what, she's my boss now. If you still want to live well, don't come near us." With that, Duan Wan glanced at Ding Biao with a hint of murderous intent. "You, Pui, how dare you threaten me with your abilities? I want to see how capable Lu Tianyu is now since he didn't die a year ago." Bai Shuer saw that Duan Wan dared to warn her. Who didn't know her Lu Tianyu's ability? She was just a female whore, who relied on sleeping with men to survive. She didn't know what kind of medicine the woman in front of her ate to protect her like this. Bai Shuer was not stupid. She did not react when Duan Wan attacked just now. But now she had already noticed that Duan Wan was not normal. But on second thought, a person with some ability like Duan Wan called Lu Tianyu boss. Moreover, the car that she sat in seemed to have been remodeled. She was already a level 4 arcanist, and even she, Bai Shuer, did not receive such treatment. Why did this woman with no arcana look like she was living a better life than her? The more she thought about it, the more indignant she felt. Bai Shuer's eyes reddened with jealousy. Unlike Bai Shuer, Ding Biao felt a chill in his heart after being warned by Duan Wan's murderous glare. However, he was not afraid of Duan Wan's gaze. He still looked in the direction of Lin Xiao's car with a blank expression. The light in his eyes dimmed, and no one could tell what he was thinking. But Lin Xiao had already sensed his thoughts from just now. Ding Biao thought that Lin Xiao did not know his intentions. Seeing Lin Xiao leave, Ding Biao retracted his unfathomable gaze. He glanced at Bai Shuer, then turned and left. Before he left, he even left a sentence for Bai Shuer. Settle your own matters. Don't let them get in the way. When Bai Shuer heard this, she saw that his eyes secretly glanced at Jiang Ainan's mother. She knew that he meant for her to secretly deal with these two people. Their eyes hinted that Duan Wan did not understand, but they did not know that Duan Wan had already guessed their intentions. If she could not understand such an obvious exchange of glances, she would not be able to stay by Lin Xiao's side. But she did not say anything. She glanced at Bai Shuer and turned to leave. She went to secretly gather information. Lin Xiao drove 2 rounds with the 4 children. When all the spies behind them had been cleaned up by the people secretly sent by Wu Qingyue, they returned directly to the front of his small courtyard. After getting out of the car, Lin Xiao noticed that Wu Yueling's emotions had recovered a little. Although her reaction just now was a little strange, it was not very serious. After entering the living room, Wu Yueling sat on the sofa and did not move. Lin Xiao threw Tung Tung beside her and looked at him with his eyes. You were the one who wanted to bring her out. Now go and coax her yourself. Tung Tung. It was not yet 4 in the afternoon, so Wu Qingyue was not at home. When Lin Xiao and the others went out, he also went out to work. Lingling, are you still afraid? Before Tung Tung could crawl to Wu Yueling's side, Lin Xiaolu had already leaned over and sat on the sofa armrest next to her. Tung Tung used his limbs to crawl around on the sofa and then sat next to Wu Yueling. When Wu Yueling heard what Lin Xiaolu said, she shook her head. Just now when there were so many people outside, she was indeed a little nervous and scared. Now that she was back, she was fine. Then let's go tomorrow, okay? At this moment, Tung Tung looked up at Wu Yueling with a pair of puppy-like big eyes and said, It's so fun over there. There are so many people, and we haven't seen it on the 3rd floor yet. Seeing him like this, Wu Yueling was a little hesitant. She was a little against the situation today, but when she saw her brother's puppy-like eyes, she couldn't bear to reject him. At this moment, Lin Xiaolu glanced at Tung Tung, and then at Lin Xiao. Seeing that Lin Xiao didn't say anything, she thought for a moment and looked at Wu Yueling and said, Lingling, you won't be afraid if you go a few more times. You'll get used to it. See, aren't you used to be used to us? You used to be afraid of us. Besides, Tung Tung is so noisy, he definitely won't stay at home obediently in the future. You have to get used to facing the outside world. Otherwise, you won't be able to play with Tung Tung. This was very effective. As long as it was related to Tung Tung, Wu Yueling would hesitate. At this moment, Lin Xiao smiled and said to Wu Yueling, Lingling, Tung Tung is your brother. He is still young, so he needs you to protect him and take care of him. Only when she understood this, and had a sense of responsibility, would her mind slowly become stronger. Hearing Lin Xiao's words, Wu Yueling had a strange feeling in her heart. Tung Tung is your brother. He is still young. He needs you to protect and take care of him. This sentence suddenly made Wu Yueling's little heart feel a subtle sense of satisfaction. It was as if she also used that sense of accomplishment. She didn't understand. However, Wu Yueling's eyes revealed a kind of resolute gaze. Lin Xiao smiled and didn't say anything again. Chapter 1030. After hearing Lin Xiao say that she wanted to protect and take care of her brother, Wu Yueling did not resist going out, because she could not stop Tung Tung from having fun because of her. Tung Tung immediately jumped onto Wu Yueling's legs and waved his legs. He laughed and said, That's right, Lingling. You have to protect me in the future. Look at how small I am, how weak I am. I am still a baby. Lin Xiao did not know why, but she could not bear to look at him. Lin Xiaolu looked at Tung Tung and said, You can roll on the sofa a few more times, and that will be enough. Tung Tung said disdainfully, Do I need to roll? I'm a baby to begin with. Tong Tong then said, Short arms and short legs. Tung Tung. Tong Tong, people will hate you if you tell the truth. Lin Xiaolu covered her mouth and laughed. Tong Tong, who was already 4 years old, looked confused. Why would I be hated? Mommy said that children should not lie. Lin Xiaolu choked and thought for a while. Well, because the truth is not nice to hear. I am not asking you to lie. That's not right. Well, don't talk nonsense. Tong Tong looked at her, not really understanding, and nodded. Oh, an hour later, Duanwan came back. She brought information about Bai Shuer and her group. The 4 children had already returned to their rooms to take a nap. Lin Xiao sat on the sofa in the living room waiting for her. Bai Shuer's corpse hunter team has some ulterior motives. Their leader has been secretly gathering information about our base. Seeing that you have not appeared for a year, he guessed that you must have stayed in the base for a year. So he wanted to get close to you to gather information. Bai Shuer is probably just putting on an act, but in fact, it is Ding Biao who is doing something behind her back. Duanwan handed her the list of information and said. Lin Xiao took the list expressionlessly and said, when I saw them today, I sensed Bai Shuer and Ding Biao's intentions. But since they dare to target me, let's see if they have the ability to accept the consequences of provoking me. What's with that auntie? Duanwan continued. Bai Shuer has a very good friend called Jiang Anan, a level 4 Earth ability user. That auntie is Jiang Anan's mother. Not long ago, the 2 of them left the base for a mission with the corpse hunters. When they returned 2 days ago, Jiang Anan was seriously injured and fell into a coma. It was said that when they were killing zombies outside, Bai Shuer was in danger and Jiang Anan risked his life to save her. In the end, he ended up in a coma due to serious injuries. Moreover, Jiang Anan's mother's health was not good. Jiang Anan had been using the zombie cores and credits he earned to buy medicine for her. That's why Mama Jiang doesn't have the zombie cores and credits to send Jiang Anan to the hospital. Lin Xiao understood and said, so Madame Jiang went to find Bai Shuer? Duanwan said, Bai Shuer has always been on good terms with Jiang Anan, and she is his only good friend. I guess Madame Jiang was at her wit's end, so she went to look for her. Lin Xiao touched his chin and said, was Bai Shuer saved by Jiang Anan? If it's true, it doesn't seem impossible for her to leave her good friend, who was seriously injured, to save her. After all, this Bai Shuer is also a very selfish person. She probably doesn't treat Jiang Anan as a friend. Based on Lu Tianyu's blurry memory of Bai Shuer, although he wasn't very clear about her character, she didn't seem like a good person. It's true that Jiang Anan saved her. Many people in the corpse hunters know about this. Although Ding Biao intentionally covered up this matter, there's no such thing as a wall that doesn't have ears. The matter still got out. Duanwan nodded and said, TSK, this Jiang Anan must be blind. To be good friends with such a person. Lin Xiao curled his lips. Not necessarily. Maybe this Bai Shuer is too good at pretending. Duanwan said. Lin Xiao suddenly frowned and said, wait a minute, you said that this Jiang Anan only has Bai Shuer as a good friend? Doesn't Jiang Anan have other friends? Duanwan nodded. I heard that this Jiang Anan is a little antisocial, and doesn't like to interact with others. Before she met Bai Shuer, she actually went out to kill zombies outside the base alone. Later, she met Bai Shuer and joined the corpse hunters team that Bai Shuer was in. Lin Xiao thought about it. Something feels wrong. Go and investigate the first contact between this Bai Shuer and Jiang Anan, as well as Jiang Anan's background. He was used to being a loner. Why did he suddenly become friends with Bai Shuer? Now that Jiang Anan is in trouble, Bai Shuer wants to distance herself from her. Duanwan's eyes lit up and she said, today, I saw that Ding Biao seemed to want Bai Shuer to get rid of Jiang Anan and her mother. Maybe there's something hidden in this? Lin Xiao waved his hand. I think so too. Tell me Jiang Anan's location. I'll go check on her situation. Since he felt that there was something hidden between Jiang Anan and Bai Shuer, Lin Xiao felt that Jiang Anan might know something. He might as well go check on the situation before she died. Yes. Duanwan went out. Not long after, Wuxia came back. I heard that you guys encountered some trouble at the trading hall today? Wuxia asked as he walked towards the stairs. Lin Xiao nodded. He brought people with him, so he must know what happened. Wuxia shrugged. Seems like you don't need my help. Lin Xiao glanced at him indifferently and didn't say anything. Obviously, she didn't want to answer his question that she already knew the answer to. Oh, I heard that Lingling's reaction is quite good. She used to be very resistant to unfamiliar places with many people. Today, It seems like her reaction was very mild. Wu Qinghua was very happy with this report from his subordinate. Lin Xiao looked at him and asked, "So?" Wu Qinghua smiled and squinted his eyes. "So please bring her out more in the future. I'm quite busy and don't have time." Lin Xiao sneered. "You make it sound like I'm very free. Don't forget that Lingling is your daughter, not mine." Wu Qinghua smiled nonchalantly. "I treat her as yours too. Also, I think you actually see Lingling as your own child. At least half a child?" Lin Xiao. She really couldn't refute this. She liked Lingling, and Lingling was very obedient and liked shouting a lot. In Lin Xiao's heart, she had already subtly categorized Lingling under her wing. Now that Wu Qinghua pointed it out, she couldn't refute his words. Seeing Lin Xiao's silent expression, Wu Qinghua smiled and went upstairs. "I'll come down to cook later. Or if you want to, I don't mind. Lin Xiao. Unless you want me to blow up your kitchen." Chapter 1031. Wu Qinghua looked at her and paused, then turned to look at her strangely. "You don't know how to cook?" Lin Xiao looked at him calmly. "Do you want to try?" Wu Qinghua's expression. "Lin Xiao. What's wrong?" Wu Qinghua suddenly came back to his senses and shook his head. "It's nothing. No need, I'll do it." With that, he turned and walked upstairs, but there was a thoughtful look in his eyes with his back to Lin Xiao. "Lin Xiao? Question mark." She felt that his expression was a little strange. What was wrong? Was it strange that she didn't know how to cook? She just said it casually. Oh no. Wait. Lu Tianyu could cook. Oh no. She was going to be exposed. Did Wu Qinghua think that she didn't want to cook at his house? It seemed that he also knew that Lu Tianyu could cook. Wu Qinghua, who was walking up, thought to himself, when this woman said that she was going to blow up the kitchen, her expression seemed to be natural. This showed that she seemed to do this kind of thing often, which was why she said this reason so smoothly. But according to the information he had checked before, Lu Tianyu could cook. Although he didn't know how good his cooking skills were, he definitely wouldn't blow up the kitchen. Was this woman lying to him just now? Or was it just an excuse because she didn't want to cook? But Wu Qinghua felt that when the woman said that just now, it felt too real. It didn't seem like she said it casually. Why did it feel so strange? Wu Qinghua walked into his study with a confused look on his face. Lin Xiao silently watched his disappearing figure from below, wondering if she should cook a meal to make up for the excuse she had just made. What if he believed her and started to suspect her again? In a room in a building in Area B on the other side of High City, a group of people were sitting and standing. What? Lost him? When Bai Shuer heard these people say that the people following Lin Xiao's car had lost the target, she immediately widened her eyes and said angrily, "Are you all useless? Can't even two women keep an eye on him?" "Shut up." Ding Biao glanced at Bai Shuer coldly and said, "Lu Tianyu is not simple now. You'd better not treat him as the previous Lu Tianyu, or you'll be the one suffering." His words clearly showed his contempt for Bai Shuer. Bai Shuer was coldly reprimanded. She glared at him unhappily and said, "Not simple? How is it not simple? I don't think there's anything special about him. Didn't he rely on others to protect him? If it wasn't for the woman beside her, she wouldn't have been able to do anything. Since you think so highly of her, let's see what she's capable of." "Alright, stop arguing." At this time, another man in his 30s in the room spoke up to stop the two from arguing. Then he looked at Ding Biao and said, "Since Lu Tianyu is not dead, he hasn't appeared in Sea City for a year. But how did you know that she was in the Universal Base? Did you find out where she came from?" Ding Biao shook his head. "I didn't find anything. That's why I thought she was suspicious. There was no record of her entering or exiting the base. And the people we sent were all stopped on the way. There must be someone protecting her from behind." The man said, "She's nowhere to be found now. Haiqing is so big, it won't be easy to find her again. Didn't you find anything about those kids?" Ding Biao still shook his head. "I think since she's already appeared, she definitely won't be idle. The entire base knows Lu Tianyu's temperament. He likes to cause trouble outside when he has nothing to do. Just wait, she'll come out on her own." At this time, Bai Shuer suddenly said something that everyone agreed with. The man nodded. Well, then send more people outside to keep an eye on the places where she used to appear. Ding Biao nodded hesitantly. I got it. But I really feel that this time, she doesn't seem to be as easy to see through as before. The man said coldly, whether she's easy to see through or not, we have to keep an eye on her. Also, don't just focus on her. The two women and the children around her are all targets. We can always find something. Ding Biao immediately nodded. Okay, I got it. At this time, the man said to Bai Shuer, hurry up and get rid of Jiang Anan. If others notice her, it will only bring us trouble. Bai Shuer was stunned for a moment before nodding. Oh, I got it. I'll bring people to take action tonight. And her mother, the man suddenly added. Bai Shuer looked at him in confusion. Her mother doesn't know about those things. Are we still going to do something to her? The man glanced at her and said, have you forgotten what happened today? If she pesters you in the hall in public again, it will attract attention. Do you understand? What if someone notices Jiang Anan from her? Oh, I got it. Bai Shuer nodded. Ding Biao suddenly said, that Jiang Anan has already been infected by the zombie virus. She won't survive no matter what. I don't think she will wake up. Even if she does, she might become a zombie. Her mother is a bigger variable. It's better to make her disappear as soon as possible. The man said, in that case, why don't we just turn her into a zombie and bite her mother to death? Bai Shuer's eyes lit up. That's a good idea. Even if she is discovered, she will just be caught and turned into a zombie. They won't be able to trace it back to us. After dark that night, in an ordinary one-bedroom suite in the civilian area, there was an unconscious woman lying on the bed in the bedroom. The woman's face was pale, and her lips were so pale that they were almost black. She was covered with a quilt and lay motionless. At this moment, a middle-aged woman in her 40s or 50s walked in and looked at her daughter's appearance on the bed. Jiang Shiran stood by the bed with despair in her eyes. She sobbed and said, I told you not to trust people so easily, but you didn't believe me. Now, you treat them as friends, but they just want to use you. Do you know Anan? Why won't you listen to your mother? At this moment, there was a knock on the door. Jiang Shiran's eyes were calm, and she didn't respond. The knock on the door didn't stop, and it seemed to be very urgent. Jiang Shiran turned around silently and wiped her eyes and face with her sleeves. She walked out of the bedroom and looked through the peephole on the living room door. Who is it? There was a man's shadow standing outside the door. The light in the corridor was very dim, and the man's face couldn't be seen clearly. A man's voice sounded outside. Please open the door. We're here to save your daughter. Jiang Shiran didn't open the door hastily, but stared at the man vigilantly and asked, who are you? Why do you want to save my daughter? Although she really needed people to help her family now, it didn't mean that her IQ had gone offline, and she would believe anyone at this time. The man outside the door took a step back so that the light shone on his face and said, don't worry. If we were here to harm you, we wouldn't have knocked on the door so openly. Chapter 1032. Jiang Shiran thought about it and realized that the man was right. Furthermore, the light was already shining on the man's face. She didn't know him either, so she didn't dare to open the door. However, the other party said that he was here to save Anan. What if it was true? Jiang Shiran didn't dare to gamble, but she also didn't want to give up hope. Just as she was hesitating, the man outside the door was suddenly pushed aside by a hand. Then a woman's voice was heard. Step aside, let me speak. Then Jiang Shiran saw an ordinary-looking woman, wearing a camouflage military uniform appear. Hello, it's about your daughter Jiang Anan. I think you should open the door and let us in if you really want to save her. The woman did not reveal her identity, but her last sentence struck Jiang Shiran's heart. She gritted her teeth and slowly opened the door. She opened the door a little more than 10 centimeters wide. Seeing that the other party did not immediately rush to push her away, she opened the door doubtfully. The man and woman outside looked at her quietly, their expressions calm. Jiang Shiran said, who the hell are you? It doesn't matter who we are, but there's a piece of information that should be very important to you. Do you know that someone is preparing to kill you? Duanwan looked at Jiang Shiran and said. Jiang Shiran's expression changed when she heard her words. Then, she let the two of them into the house. After closing and locking the door, she turned to the two people in the room and asked, "Who are you? Did he know something? You said you wanted to save my daughter. Is that true?" Duanwan pointed to the man next to her and said, "Oh, you don't need to know who he is. You just need to know who he is. He works for Leader Wu. He has some information about your daughter that he wants to know from you. Before I can save your daughter, you have to let me see her injuries first." Jiang Shiran's eyes narrowed when she heard Duanwan say that the man was Chief Wu's man. Then he lowered his head and walked towards the bedroom door. "My daughter is inside. Go in if you want to see her." At this time, in Wu Qingyue's house, Lin Xiao secretly stared at Wu Qingyue's face. She didn't know if he believed her words. Maybe she should cook a meal to prove that she was Lu Tianyu. However, she wasn't lying when she said that she would blow up the kitchen. In the past, Lin Xiao often cooked in the kitchen, so she didn't have to cook at home. Later, after she had her second boyfriend, she was forced to be trained by him like a recruit. At that time, when she entered the kitchen, it was like a training ground. Now her cooking was just SOSO. Although it wasn't very good, it wasn't that bad either. At least she wouldn't blow up the kitchen anymore. The last time he made it for Lin Hao, he complained that it was a little salty. Looking at Wu Qingyue's previous expression, it seemed that he was really suspicious of her. He wondered how he would feel if one day he found out that he wasn't the real Lu Tianyu. Who was it that he liked? Was it Lu Tianyu himself, or Lu Tianyu's appearance? Or was it Lin Xiao's inside? Lin Xiao was a little puzzled and curious. She thought that Wu Qingyue might only like Lu Tianyu or Lu Tianyu's face. After knowing that she wasn't Lu Tianyu, he would probably be disappointed. He felt a little upset. Lin Xiao pursed his lips and swept away the uncomfortable darkness in his heart. Even though she was now using Lu Tianyu's identity and face, she was still Lin Xiao. If Wu Qingyue didn't like her now, then there was no need for her to think about it. After dinner, the group of children went back to their rooms to play. Lin Xiaolu was older, so she acted as the little brat and took care of the three younger ones. She read a children's storybook that Wu Qingyue had given her to the three younger ones. From time to time, she would be scolded by little Tung Tung, scolding the protagonist of the story for being either stupid or silly, Lin Xiaolu. "I really want to throw the storybook in my hand at his face. No wonder my aunt always wanted to scold him when she was with this kid." Lin Xiao, on the other hand, went into the space and picked a large plate of strawberries for the children. "What the hell? Who said that monkeys are smart? You don't even want such a big watermelon. Why are you chasing after a little rabbit? Can that rabbit be eaten as a meal?" Tung Tung rolled around on the bed and shouted. Lin Xiaolu looked at him with a depressed expression. Holding the book, she finally couldn't help but say, "Okay, you can shut up. I'm just telling a story. If you don't want to listen, then don't be noisy." She was annoyed by this kid who kept interrupting her story. In the end, she even had to listen to him complain about the intelligence of monkeys. However, she felt that this kid was very reasonable, and she couldn't refute him. Lin Xiao put the strawberries on the table in their room and said, "Eat the strawberries. You have so many questions. Do you know why the little monkey didn't get anything in the end?" Tung Tung rolled his eyes and looked at her. "If I were that little monkey, wouldn't I go back to pick up the watermelon if I couldn't catch the rabbit?" "It's because the rabbit is too stupid." Lin Xiao slapped his butt, then sat next to the bed with him in her arms and said, "Yes, yes, yes, you are the smartest. But the little monkey's story not only tells you that it is stupid, but also tells you that you can't do things half-heartedly and can't see the value in front of you. Also, don't interrupt others when they are talking. It's too impolite." Lin Xiao's last sentence, except for Tung Tung, the other three children nodded in agreement. Tong Tong looked at Tung Tung and said, "Well, Mommy also said that it's impolite." Lin Xiaolu looked at Tung Tung and said, "That's too impolite." Wu Yueling also looked at Tung Tung with a burning gaze and nodded heavily. Tung Tung, who had been stabbed a few times, was speechless. After playing with the children for a while, Lin Xiao told them to go to bed early. Then she turned around and walked out of the room, Entering another room, Lin Xiao took out a pile of documents that Shen Yuzhen had sent over that night and sat at the table, reading and signing. After midnight, Lin Xiao had just finished her work for the night. When she was about to sit and absorb the zombie cores until dawn, she felt Wu Qingyue walking towards her door. "Come in. There's no need to knock," Lin Xiao said as soon as the man stopped. Wu Qingyue opened the door and walked in, then slowly closed the door. "What's the matter?" Lin Xiao turned the chair over, sat with her legs crossed, and looked up at him. Wu Qingyue stood by the door and looked at her for a few seconds, then walked over and looked down at her, asking, "You really don't know how to cook?" Lin Xiao shrugged and said, "Did I say that? I only said that I would blow up the kitchen, but it doesn't mean that I don't know how to cook." Wu Qingyue looked at her strangely and said, "Usually, the probability of people who blow up the kitchen knowing how to cook is very small." Lin Xiao looked at him coldly and said, "So you came in the middle of the night to talk to me about the probability of people who blow up the kitchen knowing how to cook?" Wu Qingyue looked at her, narrowed his eyes and said, "I've been thinking about why a person will suddenly change so much before and after death. A drastic change in personality may be understandable, but if some of the small problems and instinctive habits also change, it is a bit suspicious, right?" Chapter 1033. Wu Qingyue's words made Lin Xiao's expression slightly stunned, but she quickly returned to normal. However, she was very surprised in her heart. She was a little surprised by Wu Qingyue's attitude at this time. Without waiting for Lin Xiao to say anything, Wu Qingyue stared at Lin Xiao and said, "From the beginning, I was very curious as to why you cared so much about the Netherworld King's base. Moreover, you cared so much about the Lin family. I've checked. Lu Tianyu didn't know the Lin family of Netherworld King's base before. And you, after you died and became a zombie, not only did your temperament change greatly, but your way of doing things and doing things have also changed into another person." Lin Xiao's eyes flashed slightly, and she tried to maintain a calm expression on her face. However, her heart was a little churning, and after thinking about it, she suddenly felt relieved. Since Wu Qingyue could support a survival base with more than 1 million people, he was naturally not a simple person. She suddenly felt a little expectant, wondering if the other party had really recognized who she was. She looked at him with a dark gaze and said in a deep voice, "So, what do you want to say?" In Wu Qingyue's deep eyes, a few unfathomable lights flashed. He looked straight into Lin Xiao's eyes and said, "You're not Lu Tianyu at all." When he heard what the female zombie said today, Wu Qingyue returned to the study full of doubts. He didn't do anything, he just sat in front of the desk, and thought that this female zombie gave him a very strange feeling that something was wrong. She said that she would blow up the kitchen, and Wu Qingyue felt that she might have said it casually to fool him. But the other party said it so naturally, as if she really would blow up the kitchen often. Wu Qingyue felt that he wouldn't misread people's expressions, let alone mishear the female zombie's tone. He suddenly thought of the changes that happened after she became a zombie, as if she had become another person. The change in attitude towards Sea City and him was huge, and she also paid too much attention to and protected the survivors of Netherworld King's base. He had always wondered why, but today, the female zombie's words suddenly flashed in his mind. He thought of the female zombie's skillful handling of official business, the neat methods and layout of the new base, and her skills and abilities. Abilities could be said to be a coincidence, but a person's skills couldn't be learned immediately. In the past, Wu Qingyue had never understood what was going on. Now that it was the era of science, he had never thought in the direction of supernatural fantasy, possession, and so on. He had never thought about it. But today he suddenly thought about it. If Lu Tianyu was no longer the original Lu Tianyu, then all of this could be explained. So if she wasn't Lu Tianyu after becoming a zombie, then who was she? Who would do something that only a leader would do? Who was the one who was used to doing things that only a leader would do? Who was the one who calmly and easily handled the tasks that the leader was supposed to do? Moreover, he was so concerned about the survivors of the Netherworld King's base. He was so concerned about Lin Feng, Lin Hao, and Lin Wenwen's family. Other than the woman who used to be the leader of the Netherworld King's base, who else could it be? Wu Qingyue suddenly felt very stupid. He couldn't even see the true identity of the woman he loved. On one hand, he thought that she was the evil Lu Tianyu, and on the other hand, he was puzzled by her change. He suddenly felt that it was natural that the female zombie in front of him didn't accept him, because he didn't even know who his sweetheart was. What qualifications did he have to make the other party accept him? Wu Qingyue had never felt that his IQ had dropped so much until today. Lin Xiao looked at him in silence, then smiled calmly and said, "Oh, if I'm not Lu Tianyu, then do you think this face is fake?" Although she was sitting, the other party was standing, but she didn't feel pressured, and the aura of both sides wasn't weak. Even if Wu Qingyue's eyes told her that the other party had suddenly figured something out and guessed something, she wouldn't directly admit it like a fool. Besides, would a normal person really believe this kind of thing? This face was slowly recovered by the other party. From the beginning of her disfigurement, the other party saw this body clearly before Lu Tianyu died. Even if others might think that she had plastic surgery to become Lu Tianyu, Wu Qingyue wouldn't believe it. Wu Qingyue said to her with a chuckle, "No, your face is not fake, and your body is not fake. I can recognize every part of your body that hasn't changed. But your soul is not Lu Tianyu's." Lin Xiao said with some surprise, "Why don't you say it's my memory? It's still possible to change a person's memory with the current science." Hypnosis and memory implantation were not only possible with science, but also with superpowers. In fact, it wasn't difficult to change a person's memory. At this time, Wu Qingyue turned around and walked to the only sofa in her room and sat down, then answered Lin Xiao's question. If a person's memory is changed, then when he does things according to the fake memory. In fact, his eyes are not firm, but there is a faint sense of doubt in his heart that he doesn't know. But you are different. You are very determined to do things that Lu Tianyu would never want to do in the past. There is also a person's physical instinct. Even if the memory is changed, it can't be changed. The instinct only exists in the soul's memory. Lin Xiao looked at him and felt a little unhappy. All of a sudden, all of her secrets were peeled away layer by the other party. And then her true face was revealed. He wanted to expose her true identity at the slightest disagreement. She had been wearing a good disguise, but it was suddenly exposed. Could they still cooperate well? What about the trust between people before? Was it fed to the zombies by Wu Qingyue? Although she had surrendered in her heart, on the surface, Lin Xiao's face did not change. She sneered and said, "Although I don't understand what you are saying, I don't want to know what you are thinking. It's late, please go back." Wu Qingyue looked at her deeply for a few seconds, then stood up silently. Then when he walked to the door, he said with a meaningful smile, "It doesn't matter. I have already got the answer I want." Lin Xiao. What the hell did I say? How did you get the answer you want? Wait, what is your answer? Wu Qingyue opened the door and looked at Duan Wan standing outside with a smile when he walked out. Then he turned around and left. Duan Wan walked in, then closed the door and turned to look at Lin Xiao. Why do I feel that when he looked at me just now, he seemed to have seen through something? Lin Xiao said helplessly. His mind suddenly became clear. Duan Wan looked at her blankly. Lin Xiao said clearly, "He guessed my identity." Duan Wan's eyes slightly widened. "You mean?" Lin Xiao nodded and didn't want to talk more. She waved her hand at her with a tired expression. "Well, how's the information?" Chapter 1034. Duan Wan looked at her in surprise for a few seconds before she put away her astonishment. He began to report to Lin Xiao. That Jiang Anan has been infected by the zombie virus. I don't know how Mother Jiang found out that Haiqing Central Medical Hospital has a medicine made from your energy lake that can suppress the spread of the virus. In the end, she wanted to send Jiang Anan here. In order to prevent Jiang Anan from turning into a zombie, it doesn't matter even if she remains unconscious. As Duan Wan spoke, she continued. And tonight, Bai Shuer and Ding Biao are also preparing to send people to deal with the mother and daughter. Li Yueshan and I have already secretly moved Jiang Anan to another place. I also let Jiang Anan drink your energy lake water, which temporarily suppressed the spread of the virus in her body. Lin Xiao nodded. Duanwan continued. You guessed correctly. Bai Shuer and Jiang Anan's friendship was intentional. Although Jiang Anan was often alone, she and her mother carried a secret. It was because of this secret that Bai Shuer took the trouble to get close to her and befriend her. Now that the secret is in our hands, Bai Shuer is preparing to get rid of Jiang Anan. Lin Xiao glanced at her. So Jiang Anan saving Bai Shuer this time was actually a trap that Bai Shuer had set for her? Duanwan nodded. Lin Xiao asked again. What is the secret? Duanwan said. It's said that Jiang Anan's father is dead, but he's not actually dead. However, her father was not in Haicheng, but in China. It was said that he was an expert in botany before the apocalypse. No one in Sea City who knew the Jiang family knew about this, but Bai Shuer's corpse hunting team had a secret intelligence transaction with Wuxia. Wuxia might think that Jiang Anan's father was a very important person, so in order to control him, they tried to find out the existence of Jiang Anan and her mother. So let Ding Biao help keep an eye on Jiang Anan. Lin Xiao frowned. In that case, Jiang Anan and her mother should be used as hostages. Why does Bai Shuer's team want to get rid of them now? Duanwan said. Mrs. Jiang said that Jiang Anan's father was going to betray Wuxia a few months ago, but in the process of being chased by the Chinese, he was accidentally shot and killed. However, he had given a copy of the diary to someone else and asked that person to bring it to High City for Jiang Anan. Bai Shuer had tricked Jiang Anan into giving her this diary, so she was prepared to kill the two of them. Lin Xiao nodded in understanding. I see. So, does Bai Shuer's corpse hunting team still trade information with Wuxia? Duanwan replied. Li Yushan has also investigated the matter regarding their team. I believe that Leader Wu will send someone to deal with it soon. Do you still want to see Jiang Anan? She is now infected by the zombie virus. Do you have any way to cure her? Lin Xiao responded and stood up. Go. Why not? If she's not dead, I can save her. Lin Yu was the first, Bao Xiaoguo was the second, and now Jiang Anan was the third. On the other side, Wu Qingyue returned to his study room and received the report from Li Yushan. It was the same as Duanwan's. Then he asked Wu Qingyue, Are these people righteous or secretly righteous? Wu Qingyue said, Are they just trading information? Do they have any intention of joining Wuxia? Li Yushan shook his head. I think so. They seem to be preparing to join Wuxia. Wu Qingyue thought for a while and said, Then let's clean them up openly. Anyway, they haven't left Sea City yet. Let's use selling confidential information as an excuse. Yes. Oh right, go and get me detailed information on the former Netherworld King's leader Netherflame. I want it to be very detailed. I want his background before the apocalypse too. Wu Qingyue suddenly gave him an order. Ah, didn't she? Li Yushan looked at him in confusion. He didn't know why his leader suddenly wanted him to investigate the background information of the dead Netherworld King's base leader. But thinking that he was just a subordinate, he could only do his job first. Oh yes. Wu Qingyue smiled mysteriously and murmured. No wonder your interaction with Lin Hao gave me a very familiar feeling. And Duanwan too. Li Yushan was confused. He didn't understand what his leader was talking about. When Bai Shuer and Ding Biao secretly brought people to Jiang Anan's house, they looked at the empty house with a gloomy expression. Where are they? Didn't you guys send people to keep an eye on her house? Ding Biao looked at a man beside him and asked. The man seemed to be a little flustered and said, They suddenly lost contact. I haven't been able to contact them now. So. Bai Shuer frowned and said, Jiang Anan is already in this state. If she's discovered, she'll be immediately captured and locked up. They don't dare to appear outside casually, but where can they go now? Ding Biao thought for a while, and looked inside and outside the house with a flashlight. Everything is still there. It seems like they left temporarily. Bai Shuer suddenly sneered and said, Jiang Anan is already in this state. She might turn into a zombie at any time. That old woman even dared to bring her out. Does she want to die faster? Although Mother Jiang was young, she looked older because of her poor health. So Bai Shuer called her old woman behind her back. Ding Biao said with a serious expression. Quickly find out where they are. Don't let them expose the diary to others. It'll definitely cause us a lot of trouble. Oh, Bai Shuai replied woodenly. The few of them quickly left the Jiang family and went around to find out where Jiang Anan and her daughter went. But after a night of searching, there were no clues. Lin Xiao arrived at the place where Jiang Anan was. It was a rather remote place in the Central Medical Center. There was a tightly guarded building there. There were many rooms in the building. She followed Duan into the building. The guard at the corridor door didn't stop them. Duan brought Lin Xiao into the building and walked up the stairs. When they reached the 3rd floor, they turned and walked along the side corridor. He only stopped when he reached the door of one of the rooms. They're inside. Duan looked at the closed door and said. As she spoke, she raised her hand and knocked on the door. Soon the door opened from the inside. The middle-aged woman that Lin Xiao saw during the day stood behind the door and was stunned when she saw Lin Xiao. It's you. When she looked at Duan again, her expression turned into one of realization. She didn't notice Duan's face during the day, so she didn't remember that she was the person who fought with Bai Shuai during the day. But when she saw Lu Tianyu's face, she remembered. Chapter 1035. Mrs. Jiang knew Lu Tianyu. Many people in the entire Sea City base knew Lu Tianyu, and many people had seen her. But very few people had seen her without makeup. However, she also recognized Lin Xiao's face as Lu Tianyu's, and when she went to see Bai Shuai today, she also noticed Lin Xiao. Because of the discussion around them, she didn't notice Duan. Now that she saw the two of them together, she remembered that she seemed to have seen Duan during the day. She is the one who can save your daughter. Duan pointed to Lin Xiao and said. Mrs. Jiang looked at her hesitantly, but she didn't resist. She took a step back, which meant that she agreed with Duan's words. Lin Xiao walked in through the passage she made. Without saying anything, she went straight to the bed in the room. Duan locked the door, then took out an agreement and handed it to her. She said cautiously to Mrs. Jiang, You can't tell anyone what you see later. If you leak the news, it won't do you any good. Madame Jiang looked at Lin Xiao, and then at her daughter. She looked a little sad and nodded to take the agreement from Duan. Lin Xiao looked at Jiang Anan's face, and saw that she had a very beautiful face and facial features. But there was a scar from the end of her right eyebrow to the bottom of the corner of her eye, which completely ruined the beauty of her face. There were some eyebrow lines between her eyebrows, which only appeared when she frowned often. It seemed that there was a reason why she was a loner. Lin Xiao looked at Jiang Anan's face, and reached out to touch the carotid artery on the side of her neck. After feeling a slight pulse, she turned to look at Mrs. Jiang. She said, You should have heard about me. Everyone thought I was dead. In fact, I was really dead, but I came back to life. Mrs. Jiang looked at her in confusion. Lin Xiao continued to say to her, I can't show you the way to save your daughter, so please go out for a while. Can I? Mrs. Jiang looked at Lin Xiao with some resistance, as if she couldn't accept this condition. Lu Tianyu's character had always been bad in Sea City. If he left his daughter alone with him in the same room, Lu Tianyu wouldn't be able to escape. She didn't know what she would do to her daughter. However, the other party was here to save her and so she couldn't refuse him directly. Can't I watch from the side? She said hesitantly to Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao shook his head. There are some things that you can't know. It won't do you any good if you know. Nanny Jiang looked at her in silence. Duan placed her hand on Mother Jiang's shoulder and said, Don't worry. Our leader is here to save people, not to harm them. Follow me out first, please trust me. Nanny Jiang turned to look at Duan and Lin Xiao before gritting her teeth. Turning around, he walked to the door, opened it and walked out. Since things had come to this, Nanny Jiang had no reason to refuse. Duan followed her out, leaving Lin Xiao alone in the room. Only then did Lin Xiao hold Jiang Anan's hand and roll up her sleeves. Green veins popped up on the skin of his arm. The corners of her eyes began to overflow with an eerie darkness that began to devour the whites of her eyes. In less than a second, her eyes were already pitch black. Lin Xiao opened her mouth and revealed her teeth. Then she bit down on Jiang Anan's arm. She easily bit through her skin and stopped her teeth in her flesh for 3 seconds before letting go. After letting go, her eyes quickly returned to black and white. She rolled up Jiang Ainan's sleeves and stuffed them under the quilt. Lin Xiao narrowed her eyes and watched as the virus she injected into Jiang Ainan's arm began to spread and devour the virus in her body. Then, she took out a glass of pure lake water and poured it into Jiang Ainan's mouth. Seeing the virus in Jiang Ainan's body quickly dissipating, the energy of the lake water immediately began to spread from her stomach, replenishing and restoring her body functions. Lin Xiao turned to the door and opened it. She said to the outside, "Come in." Nanny Jiang immediately rushed in and leaned against the bed to carefully observe Jiang Ainan's situation. Jiang Ainan's face was still pale, and there was no difference from before. Nanny Jiang turned to look at Lin Xiao with some doubt. "This, Ainan's situation, how is it?" Lin Xiao said, "Just watch. The effects will slowly show in an hour. Don't worry." Duanwan also walked over and looked at Jiang Ainan's face. Then she rolled up her eyelids. Then she said to Nanny Jiang, "Look, her eyes have deteriorated." Hearing this, Nanny Jiang immediately came over and looked at Jiang Ainan's eyes. She saw that the purplish blood vessels in the whites of her eyes had faded a lot. They were slowly receding at a speed that could be seen by the naked eye. Seeing this, Nanny Jiang immediately revealed a surprised expression. "Really? That's great. That's great." Hope broke out of the gloom in her heart and filled it at once. "When she wakes up, take her to the universal base. Your secret has been exposed. Even if we get rid of Bai Shuer's group now, the next group will come again," Lin Xiao said to Nanny Jiang. Nanny Jiang nodded and stared straight at Jiang Ainan on the bed. Lin Xiao glanced at Jiang Ainan on the bed. "Since the diary is still in Jiang Ainan's hands, we don't know what the contents of the diary are, but it must be very important. There are too many people in High City. Even if you want to hand the diary over to the High City military, you might not be able to avoid being hunted down. Moreover, Jiang Ainan was originally infected with the zombie virus and was about to die. Now she suddenly recovered. She was saved by me. This is another secret. So, I think it's safer for her to come back to the universal base with me." "That's right. Giving us the second diary is no different from giving it to High City," Duanwan said. In exchange, Duanwan had already discussed it with Nanny Jiang. The condition for saving Jiang Ainan was to hand over the contents of the diary to the universal base. This was because Duanwan and Li Yueshan had found out that the diary Jiang Ainan gave Bai Shuer was not complete. Jiang Ainan's father had given her 2 diaries. As for Bai Shuer, she only received 1 book. Bai Shuer and Ding Biao didn't know about this. Originally, Haiqing had full authority to research this matter. But Lin Xiao also wanted to know what the contents of the diary were about. Jiang Ainan's father researched mutated plants. Perhaps there were some clues in his diary that could be of help in dealing with the underground guerrillas. So, Lin Xiao immediately decided to save Jiang Ainan herself and share the contents of the 2 diaries separately. She took half of the diary and let Wu Qingyue send people to snatch the other half. Chapter 1036. Mother Jiang sighed and said, "The diary is with Jiang Ainan. We'll only know when she wakes up." Lin Xiao nodded and said, "She'll wake up before dawn." In fact, Jiang Ainan was still tied up on the bed to prevent her from suddenly turning into a zombie and jumping up to bite people. After Lin Xiao finished speaking, he left with Duanwan. The next day, Bai Shuer and the others returned to their residence after searching for a whole night without finding any clues. Bai Shuer lived with Ding Biao. When they returned home, both of them didn't look too good. How did they suddenly disappear? Did that old woman really take Jiang Ainan away and hide her? Bai Shuer sat on the sofa in the room with a puzzled expression. Ding Biao sat on the other side with his eyes narrowed and didn't respond to her question. Bai Shuer didn't get an answer from him and looked up at him. Then she asked, "What if we can't find her? Although we've already got the thing, if she spreads the news, Haiqing will definitely target us. In that case, Sea City will definitely target us, and they will even suspect us." Ding Biao turned to look at her and replied, So no matter what, we must find them and kill them. Bai Shuer nodded and suddenly thought of Lin Xiao and the others she met yesterday. I don't know if the leader has gotten any information about Lu Tianyu. I'm sure she must have been hiding in the universal base. I don't know who the two women around her are, but they're so obedient to her. Ding Biao thought of Duan Wan who blocked them at that time and said, that woman in camouflage clothes isn't simple. Her ability is also at the 5th level. She's actually a bodyguard for Lu Tianyu. I don't know who she's working for. Maybe you're right, they're indeed from the universal base. Bai Shuer showed an annoyed expression and said gloomily, unfortunately, the people you sent to follow her have been lured away. Now we can't find any traces of her. We want to get some clues about the universal base from her, but we can't find her. Seeing that she's protected by a 5th level psychic, the person she hooked up with in the universal base is definitely not a simple person. Maybe we can really find a breakthrough from her and find out some information about the universal base. Ding Biao thought of Lu Tianyu's fair face and her immature appearance when she first went to college a few years ago. Very beautiful, very charming. Although the Lu Tianyu she saw yesterday was not wearing heavy makeup, he was even more fascinating than when he was wearing makeup. Moreover, the cold gaze in Lu Tianyu's eyes yesterday, the calm expression, and the powerful aura that suddenly came out of nowhere were completely different from before. Ding Biao's eyes flashed as he thought of the exquisite body he had played with before. Come here, he suddenly called out to Bai Shuer. Ah! Bai Shuer was confused by his sudden greeting and did not know what he wanted to do. Come here, I want to hug you. Ding Biao looked at Bai Shuer's chest and licked his lips. His eyes were dark as he spoke to her. Bai Shuer's expression froze slightly, but she did not resist. Instead, she stood up and walked to him with a dazed expression. Then, she consciously sat on his lap and looked at him with uncertainty. What's wrong? You suddenly want it. When she sat on his lap, Ding Biao hugged her waist and buried his face in her chest. However, his mind was filled with Lu Tianyu's face and body. Bai Shuer's breathing deepened slightly when Ding Biao bit her collarbone. Then, she relaxed her body and allowed him to take off her clothes. Mother Jiang leaned against the recliner in the ward and fell asleep. She had been worried about Jiang Anan for the past few days and had exhausted her mind. After Lin Xiao left last night, she watched as Jiang Anan's expression gradually recovered. Only then did she relax and sleep for a while at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. At this moment Jiang Anan, who was lying on the bed, moved her eyelids. Her thick eyelashes trembled slightly and then slowly opened. After opening her eyes, she stared blankly at the ceiling. After more than 10 seconds, her eyeballs moved and then rolled a few times. Her eyes also regained consciousness. After looking around, she saw her mother sleeping on the recliner. Jiang Anan turned her head to look at a very high and small window next to her. The light outside the window was very bright. It looked like the sun had just risen in the morning. Where was this? Why was she here? Jiang Anan thought about these two questions. She frowned and began to move her body as she thought. She found that her body was imprisoned on the bed and something was tying her up. There was a dull pain coming from several parts of her body. It was the pain of external injuries. A thought flashed in her mind. Jiang Anan suddenly remembered that she should have gone out on a mission at the base not long ago. Suddenly thinking of something, Jiang Anan's expression changed a few times, and finally, she revealed a sinister look. She closed her eyes and restrained the emotions in her eyes, covering them with a layer of coldness. Her fingers moved, and her hands slowly turned into stone. Pa! She struggled with her hands, and the restraints on her hands were broken. She knew why these restraints were holding her down, because she was infected with the zombie virus. After her hands were free, she immediately untied the restraints on her neck and upper body before sitting up. She looked at her hands in confusion. They were still her hands, but her nails were pink and white. There was no change of blackening, and her skin looked normal. She rolled up the sleeves on her forearms in disbelief, and found that the skin was normal. There were no blue veins floating, and the color had turned pale. Anan, you're awake. At this time, Mother Jiang's voice suddenly sounded. Jiang Anan looked up and saw her mother standing up from the recliner. She walked toward her with a face full of surprise. Mom, Jiang Anan calmly said to her. Great. Anan. My Anan, you really woke up. You didn't turn into a zombie. You didn't turn into a zombie. Mother Jiang rushed over and sat on the bed, holding her face with both hands. She looked at her with red eyes and cried tears of joy. Mom, how did I? Jiang Anan was also very puzzled and wanted to know what was going on. According to her last conscious mind, her whole body was cold and her limbs were stiff. There were signs of zombification all over her body. Why did it all disappear now? From her mother's words, it seemed that she knew why she didn't turn into a zombie. Great. They didn't lie to Mom. Anan, how do you feel? Have you recovered your consciousness? Mother Jiang was excited for a while, but she quickly recovered. She wiped her face and asked Jiang Anan. Jiang Anan nodded, then smiled and comforted Mother Jiang. I've recovered. I'm very good now. It seems that the virus has been cured, and my ability has recovered. Chapter 1037. That's good. That's good. Mrs. Jiang sat next to Jiang Anan and stroked her long hair. Jiang Anan looked around the strange room and said, Mom, where are we? And you said they didn't lie to you. Who are they? Are they the people who saved me? After thinking about it, she asked, Mom, who sent me back? Mrs. Jiang wiped the tears off her face and said, It was a guy from your team who sent you back. She left without saying anything after putting you down. After that, you were in a coma, and I saw that you seemed to have been scratched by zombies. Our family didn't have enough credit points in zombie cores. Later, I told them that you were injured because you were trying to save Bai Shuer, so I wanted to ask her to send you to the Central Medical Center. Speaking of this, Mrs. Jiang's expression darkened. She was angry and helpless. When Jiang Anan heard the name Bai Shuer, a cold light flashed in her eyes, but she didn't say anything. Mrs. Jiang continued, But she didn't want to care about you at all. Didn't you save her? Why doesn't she want to have anything to do with you at all? Jiang Anan shook her head and said, Mom, don't mention her anymore. From today onwards, my relationship with her is no longer that of a friend. They are enemies. Then she asked, Who helped us? Mom, what's the purpose of the other party helping us? No one would come to save her for no reason, and they even cured her of the zombie virus. She had never heard of someone who could be saved after being infected with the zombie virus. Since the other party had this method, they must know how valuable it was. If it was known, it would cause a sensation. If she didn't have any value, would the other party use this method to save her? Jiang Anan wasn't a stupid person. Since the other party saved her, it was equivalent to telling her the secret. So they definitely wouldn't let her know about it and save her life out of kindness. Mrs. Jiang also knew what she meant. She sighed and said, Do you remember Lu Tianyu who died a year ago? Jiang Anan looked at her blankly. Yes, why? Hearing her mother mention Lu Tianyu, she was a little confused. What did this have to do with that notorious woman? Mrs. Jiang said, She came back alive. She didn't die. No, she said she died, but she came back to life. She was the one who cured you of the virus. Jiang Anan's eyes slightly widened. She was shocked by her mother's words. What? She didn't die. Or she saved me? Mrs. Jiang nodded. After the shock, Jiang Anan asked in disbelief, How is that possible? It's fine that she didn't die. But why would she save me? Did she ask for something? If it was really that woman, she would definitely not be so kind as to save her. No, she wouldn't save anyone, right? Unless she had a purpose. Mrs. Jiang nodded. Jiang Anan immediately looked at her and asked, Mom, did you agree to her request? Mrs. Jiang sighed and said, I told her about your father's diary. So Jiang Anto Jiang Jiang and to Jiang Jiang Shi Jiang, and Jiang, to Jiang Ji, and I. The other one is to reveal the contents of your father's diary to her. Jiang Anan calmed down when she heard that there were conditions. Because it was expected, she didn't have much of a reaction. Moreover, after hearing these 3 conditions, she could still accept it. Although she was a little unwilling to hand over the diary, at least she could save her life. But at least it was in exchange for her life. If she lost her life, What was the point of guarding these things? Who would take care of her mother when she was gone? So these 2 diaries were not so important to Jiang Anan now. She said, but the first volume of the diary has already been taken by Ding Biao and the others. I only have the second one. Mrs. Jiang smiled and said, it doesn't matter. They said you don't have to worry about the first one. They only need the second one. Jiang Anan nodded. Suddenly she said, did they say when they will leave? I still have one more thing to do. I'll leave after I'm done. They said 2 days later. Mrs. Jiang said, and then asked, what else do you want? Jiang Anan said, Mom, Ding Biao took the diary from me. I have to get it back. And Bai Shui, or that liar, I don't want to let her go. When she said this, her expression became fierce, and an ominous glint flashed in her eyes. Ah, do you still want to find that woman? Let's go. We can't fight them. Don't make trouble. You are alive. You can't get into trouble again. If something happens to you, what should I do? Hearing Jiang Anan's words, Mrs. Jiang's expression became very resistant. Jiang Anan reluctantly held her hand back, and her eyes began to redden. She looked at her and said, Mom, but I can't take this lying down. Not only did she take my diary, but she also cheated my feelings. I used to treat Bai Shui as a friend, but I didn't expect her to do this to me. But how can you fight with her? You know how powerful the zombie hunter group is. You can't fight with her. How about we talk about it later? Mrs. Jiang still looked at her uncompromisingly. At this moment, the door was suddenly opened, and a woman's voice interrupted. How do you want to deal with her? I'll help you. She provoked me yesterday. I'll let her know what it means to overestimate herself. Jiang Anan and Lin Xiao turned their heads, and saw Lu Tianyu walking in with his hands in his trouser pockets. But it was another woman who opened the door. You are Lu Tianyu? Looking at Lin Xiao, Jiang Anan looked at her hesitantly. Lin Xiao nodded. Yes, that's right. Is there a problem? Jiang Anan looked at her for a while, then looked at the other woman who came in with Lin Xiao. Then she suddenly said to Lin Xiao, You said you want to help me. How are you going to help me? Lin Xiao smiled and said, I'll tell you the details of her and Ding Biao's movements. And then you can do it yourself. I can also help you control Ding Biao. Jiang Anan looked at her in confusion. Are you serious? Can you do it? Of course our leader can do it. If we didn't want you to take revenge yourself, we wouldn't have come to you, Shen Yuzhen said from the side. Leader. Jiang Anan grasped this title and looked at Lin Xiao in confusion. Is there a problem? She's the leader of the All-Beings base. Haven't you heard that the leader of the All-Beings base is a woman? Shen Yuzhen smiled. Jiang Anan's eyes widened, and he said with a dumbfounded expression, Of course I heard that the leader of the All-Beings base is a woman, and there are rumors that her surname is Lu. He just didn't expect that leader Lu to be Lu Tianyu. This was a little exciting. Chapter 1038. When Lin Xiao went to look for Jiang Anan, Xiao Liqing and Li Yushan quietly went to the place where Bai Shui and Ding Biao were staying at noon. They sent people to surround their residence without them noticing. Bang! The bedroom door was suddenly blown open by someone. The 2 people on the bed, who were naked under the blankets, immediately woke up and sat up on the bed. Who is it? Ding Biao yelled and sat up, looking around cautiously. He saw a group of soldiers walking in from the bedroom door. Put on your clothes and follow us, Xiao Liqing said coldly, staring at the 2 of them. The surrounding soldiers had already raised their guns and surrounded the 2 people's bed. Deputy Leader Xiao, what's going on? Breaking into a private house is one thing, but you suddenly want us to follow you. May I know the reason? Ding Biao calmed down and asked Xiao Liqing. Follow us and you'll know. Don't ask so much now. Put on your clothes, Xiao Liqing said to him calmly. Put on your clothes. The soldiers pointed their guns at the 2 of them and shouted coldly. They had no reaction to Bai Shui's exposed skin. Bai Shui grabbed the blanket and covered her chest. She glared at them angrily and anxiously. How am I supposed to put on my clothes like this? You've seen me naked, okay? Cut the crap and wear yours. A soldier standing closest to Bai Shui yelled at her impatiently. He continued, If you don't put on your clothes, you can come with us naked. The last sentence immediately shut Bai Shuai up. She could only say sullenly, "At least, help me pass the clothes over. Go pick them up yourself." The soldier refused without hesitation. Bai Shuai, "Give them to her," Xiao Liqing said calmly. Thus, the soldier standing closest to Bai Shuai's clothes had no choice but to use his gun to pick them up. Then he threw them to her on the bed. Ding Biao sat on the bed and bent over to pick up his underwear. He put them on under the blanket and then got off the bed to get other clothes. "Don't think about escaping. You can't escape." Xiao Liqing seemed to see the darkness in Ding Biao's eyes and suddenly said calmly. As soon as he finished speaking, the soldier next to him suddenly fired at Ding Biao and Bai Shuai. However, what came out of the gun were not metal bullets, but 2 needles. Behind the needles was a small tube of liquid. And, just as Ding Biao was about to move, he was injected. His legs suddenly went limp, and he knelt on the ground with a thud. After a few seconds, the strength in his legs returned. However, he could no longer sense the energy of his special ability. "I heard that Jiang Ainan's father's diary is with you. Do you want to take it out yourself and give it to us? Or do you want us to search this place?" After seeing that both of them had been injected, Xiao Liqing turned around and walked out. He then sat on the sofa and looked at the 2 people who had been dragged out. "Oh, you guys also want to snatch that diary?" Ding Biao looked at him and sneered. Xiao Liqing shook his head. "I'm not robbing you. I'm returning this diary to its owner." "Return it to master? Jiang Ainan is about to become a zombie. Will you give it to her? Do you think we're idiots?" Bai Shuai stood at the side and rolled her eyes. Xiao Liqing shrugged. "Who said we want to return it to Jiang Ainan? Returning it to her mother is also returning it to master. However, you don't have to worry about that. You just need to hand it over." Ding Biao said, "The diary isn't with me. You want to know it from me? Do you think I'll tell you that easily?" "Of course you won't tell us that easily. Otherwise, you wouldn't have needed me." At this time, a woman's voice came from the balcony. Then, Emily walked in from the balcony. Ding Biao and Bai Shuai looked at her, but they did not know Emily. As most of Mo Li's work was in the research lab, it was normal that Ding Biao and Bai Shuai, who were normal zombie hunters, did not know each other. Xiao Liqing nodded to her. "I'll leave the rest to you." Emily walked over and stood in front of Ding Biao, staring at his eyes. Ding Biao did not know that she was a spiritual-type psychic. At first, he stared at her without fear. However, after staring at her for 2 seconds, Ding Biao's eyes suddenly panicked. You're a spiritual-type psychic." However, just as he finished speaking, the light in his eyes suddenly blurred, and his pupils began to disperse. Emily only stared at him. In fact, her spiritual power had already invaded Ding Biao's brain from his eyes. "She's a spiritual type." Hearing Ding Biao's panicked words, Bai Shuai was shocked. She immediately looked at Ding Biao and the woman in front of him in panic. "Don't cause trouble." Xiao Liqing waved his hand at her and said. As soon as he spoke, the 2 soldiers who were holding Bai Shuai immediately dragged her to the side, putting some distance between her and Ding Biao. After Bai Shuai realized that Emily was a spiritual-type psychic, she panicked. She was dragged to the side in a daze. The more she thought about it, the more afraid she became. She spent 2 years trying to build a relationship with Jiang Ainan to obtain the diary, and it finally fell into her and Ding Biao's hands. As long as they could safely leave Sea City with the diary, they would be able to survive in Wuxia. However, if Ding Biao handed over the diary now, they would be able to escape. There would be no benefits in Wuxia. Just as Bai Shuai was panicking, Emily stared at Ding Biao and said, "Tell me, where did you put the diary?" Ding Biao's eyes were dull, and he was like a puppet. Hearing Emily's words, his eyes showed a hint of resistance. Emily continued to ask, "Tell me, where did you put the diary?" The resistance in Ding Biao's eyes immediately disappeared, and he obediently said expressionlessly, "Here." Emily continued to ask, "Where did you put it?" Ding Biao said, "On the wall behind the bed in the bedroom. There's a secret compartment in the wall." Hearing his words, without Xiao Liqing and Emily's orders, the soldiers immediately went into search. Bai Shuai, who was at the side, thought, It's only been 2 days. I didn't expect it to be found so quickly. You guys are quite fast. Did you find it? At this moment, a woman's voice came from outside the door. Everyone turned their heads to look, and saw a few more people coming in. Lin Xiao's long hair was tied up behind her head, and her hands were in the pockets of her jacket as she walked in with a few people. Xiao Liqing immediately stood up from the sofa and nodded at her. I'm looking. Found it. At this moment, the soldier in the bedroom walked out with a heavy notebook. Chapter 1039. Everyone's eyes immediately focused on the soldier's hand. My diary. A figure flashed out, and immediately rushed in front of the soldier. Jiang Anan. You're not dead. Seeing the figure flash out, Bai Shuer, who was originally a little flustered by the situation in the room, immediately screamed in horror when she saw Jiang Anan's figure. Jiang Anan took the familiar diary from the soldier's hand, and first checked to see if there was any damage. After hearing Bai Shuer's words, she then turned her head, and looked at her with a cold smile. What? Are you disappointed that I didn't turn into a zombie? You. Impossible. Impossible. Bai Shuer could no longer think at this time, her eyes staring at her blankly. She mumbled, then suddenly stared at her and shouted in disbelief. Impossible. You were clearly scratched by zombies, and infected with the zombie virus. It's already been 3 or 4 days. How can you still wake up? Bang dash. The door was closed by Lin Xiao with a wave of her hand. Then she said to Xiao Liqing, ask the others to leave. Xiao Liqing didn't say anything, and just waved to the people in the room, knowing that these subordinates wouldn't say anything. The soldiers all left, leaving Xiao Liqing standing beside the sofa in the room. Lin Xiao walked over and sat down. Shen Yuzhen retreated to the door and stood there. Duanwan walked to the balcony door, and stood there to look outside. Lin Xiao sat on the sofa with her legs crossed. Then she said nothing with everyone else, starting to watch the drama. Jiang Anan took the diary and walked in front of Bai Shuer, her eyes cold as she said, You spent more than 2 years to get close to me with this thing and lied to my feelings. I treat you as my only friend now, but you only treat me like a fool. Saying this, she took 2 steps back and suddenly laughed. There was a hint of disdain and mockery in her laughter. But in the end, do you think that the diary you got will bring you a better life in China? The real value is not this diary, but the second one. But you don't seem to know that there are 2 scientific research diaries of my dad, and the one that the Chinese base really wants is the second one. Hearing her words, seeing the disdain and mockery on her face, Bai Shuer's eyes widened, and she only reacted after a few seconds. Well, what did you say? No, you're lying, right? Hehe. You were deceived by me and hate me in your heart. That's why you said that, right? Jiang Anan's words seemed to be mocking her for being too stupid. She had spent more than 2 years, but had not clearly seen the true value. Jiang Anan's words told her that she was lying to him like a fool, but he seemed to have seen through her. Was she acting like a clown in his eyes? It's up to you whether you believe me or not. There's no need for me to lie to you. I plan to hand over these 2 diaries anyway. Jiang Anan looked at her coldly. No. Impossible. You must be lying to me. You hate me. Hate me for letting you get scratched by zombies. But that's your own fault. It's because you're not strong enough that you got infected by the zombie virus. Bai Shuer roared at her agitatedly. Her eyes were already wide open, and her brows furrowed together as she opened her mouth wide. Then she smiled again. Her smile was twisted as she said to Jiang Anan, You think that I should thank you for saving me? Ha 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 ha. Actually, I didn't need you to save me. Oh no. I did need you to save me. If you didn't come, how could we let you get hurt? But I didn't expect you to be so lucky. In the end, you actually managed to escape into that broken warehouse with me. Jiang Anan heard her words. Although it was a little confusing, it reminded her of what happened before. A flash of hatred flashed in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by murderous intent. Yes, it was my mistake to save you. It was also my mistake to trust you. But I didn't die, and you, Ding Biao, and the entire zombie hunter group have to pay the price. Although I didn't die, unfortunately, all of you will die. So, do you hate me? Do you hate me now? Jiang Anan reached out and pinched Bai Shuer's chin, then stared at her with murderous intent. Being oppressed by the cold murderous intent in Jiang Anan's eyes, Bai Shuer felt a chill run through her body, and her legs began to weaken. Plop, Jiang Anan's gaze forced her to sit on the ground. Jiang Anan used to live alone outside the base. Naturally, she wasn't a simple person. The murderous intent and hostility on her body were stronger than the average level 4 mutant. How did she get to know Bai Shuer back then? It was only because she unintentionally helped her mother a few times, and then they got to know each other. Now that she thought about it, perhaps when she wasn't at the base, the trouble her mother encountered might have been set up by someone else. No, Anan. I was wrong. Don't kill me. I don't want to die. They forced me to get close to you. Yes, they were the ones who forced me to do this. I had no choice. Anan, save me, please let me go. After Bai Shuer knelt on the ground, she looked around blankly. After seeing the circle of people quietly watching the show, her expression suddenly changed. She threw herself on Jiang Anan's legs and hugged her, crying, "Get lost. Do you think I'm an idiot? I'd be retarded to let you go. Bai Shuer, I don't hate you for trying to steal my father's diary, but I won't let you off for tricking me to save you. And you came back and tried to harm my mother's life. I definitely won't let you off again. You're even more disgusting than Lu Tianyu back then. At least everything she does is above board, and she won't cheat other people's feelings." Jiang Anan kicked Bai Shuer away. Lin Xiao, who was inexplicably implicated. "Why are you all looking at me? I don't care about my reputation." Seeing Lin Xiao's somewhat fierce gaze, Jiang Anan also realized what she had said. She immediately glared at Bai Shuer, who was on the ground guiltily. Yes, she was right. Lu Tianyu was indeed like that in the past. It was just that he had a high status now. More importantly, she had accidentally compared him in front of him, which was not giving him face. Hearing Jiang Anan's merciless words, Bai Shuer panicked and wanted to climb onto her legs again. "No, Anan, listen to me. They arranged for me to get close to you, and I really treat you as a friend. Are you still trying to lie to me? Do you really think I'm stupid?" Jiang Anan looked at her with disgust, then continued. "Seeing that I used to treat you as a friend, I'll personally send you on your way." Then, one of her hands suddenly stabbed towards Bai Shuer's forehead at lightning speed. Poof! A crisp sound was heard, and her fingers instantly turned into stone, directly penetrating Bai Shuer's forehead. Not even a drop of blood flowed out. Chapter 1040. Jiang Anan pulled out her petrified finger and heard a soft sound. She didn't look at Bai Shuer, whose eyes were wide open as she collapsed with a frozen expression. She raised her blood-stained finger and looked around the room. Then, she found a box of tissues and pulled out a tissue to wipe her hands. Bai Shuer's corpse fell to the ground, her expression still on her face. However, the light in her widened eyes had disappeared and were lifeless. Ding Biao, who was beside her, had been hypnotized by Mo Li when he revealed the location of the diary, after being controlled by her psychic ability. He stood at the side in a daze. When Jiang Anan looked at the dead Bai Shuer, she suddenly turned to Lin Xiao and the rest and said, "If I kill her, you won't arrest me, right?" Killing people was not allowed in a safe base. Lin Xiao looked at Xiao Liqing and the rest. Of course not, she deserved to die. And this Ding Biao and his corpse hunting team are all criminals who betrayed the base. They will all be executed. Xiao Liqing immediately shook his head. Jiang Anan immediately looked at Ding Biao and frowned. She hated Bai Shuer because she felt that Bai Shuer had lied to her. And this Ding Biao was Bai Shuer's accomplice, so Jiang Anan also wanted to kill him. After some thought, she brought the diary in her hand to Xiao Liqing and said, "This is the first diary. I'll give it to you first. Anyway, it's useless to me. I was going to give it to City Base anyway." Xiao Liqing took the diary and flipped through it. It was filled with handwritten notes on various mutated plants. After giving him the first diary, Jiang Anan looked at Lin Xiao and said, "Then let's go get the second one now. I've put it somewhere else." Lin Xiao looked at Ding Biao in surprise and asked her, "What about him? Aren't you going to do it?" Jiang Anan glanced at Ding Biao coldly and said, I've already gotten the diary back, so I'm too lazy to do it. Anyway, even if I don't do it, he won't end up any better than me. There's no meaning to me anymore. The only person I want to kill is her. As she spoke, she calmly glanced at Bai Shue's corpse. Lin Xiao stared at Bai Shui, and suddenly smiled as he sighed. Say, if they had left immediately after getting the notebook, there wouldn't have been so much trouble. And this Bai Shui, just had to come in front of me to argue with me. Otherwise, she wouldn't have ended up like this. Jiang Anan glanced at her with a strange gaze. She had been friends with Bai Shui for so long, so she naturally knew about the conflict between Lu Tianyu and Bai Shui. She also knew about Lu Tianyu's previous performance, but the Lu Tianyu in front of her, she couldn't overlap with the Lu Tianyu of the past no matter what. It felt like there were two of them. Lin Xiao brought them away, leaving Xiao Liqing to clean up the scene. Tomorrow was Xiao Tingting's 1-month birthday party. Wu Qingyue said that it would be held at night. Everyone might not have time during the day, so it was arranged to be at night. Qiu Lily and the others should be able to make it back in time. When Lin Xiao walked out of the building, he raised his head and looked in the general direction of Lake Tai. At this time, Qiu Lily was waving a few huge fire tornadoes as she chased after a group of people who were fleeing in a sorry state. Her level 7 tornado was not comparable to the tornadoes created by level 5 zombies like Yu Xiaoxian and Lu Mingsong. The wind was as strong as level 15, and the surrounding desolate and dilapidated buildings were all lifted from their ceilings, doors, and windows. Even the walls were directly torn into pieces and flew into the sky, swept into the tornado. The red tornado swept up a scorching wave of wind within a radius of 2 or 3 miles. All the objects swept into the tornado were torn apart and burned, and finally turned into flying ashes. 5 huge fire tornadoes connected the sky. If it was at night, it might have been a very beautiful scene. But in the daytime, it only made people feel that the sky was reflected red. Run! Quick! The Chinese elite troops that were running away. Although they were running away, they didn't seem very panicked. However, he did not appear to be very panicked. Instead, he tried his best to find an opportunity to escape. They definitely couldn't escape from the ground, so they needed to find an underground passage. Only by drilling into a place like the sewer could they escape the other party's fire tornado. Want to hide? If I let you go back to China alive, I will write my name backwards. Humph. Qiu Lily floated in the sky and looked down at the deserters below. Miss, your name doesn't change much even if you write it backwards. Yu Xiaoxian said next to her speechlessly. Lily, isn't it still Lily? Qiu Lily. Can I write it backwards from the bottom to the top? Yu Xiaoxian. Yes. Although she didn't know what that word was. Behind the tornado, 2 groups of people had already gathered together. Lin Wenwen looked at Long Qingying and asked worriedly, Is your injury serious? Although Long Qingying was now standing upright, like a person who was fine. But Lin Wenwen saw her fall after being shot, and Kong Qingming saved her in time. And looking at her face, it didn't look very good. Long Qingying shook her head lightly. It's okay, I won't die. Outside the base, if she didn't die, it meant that the situation was not serious. Oh, Lin Wenwen looked at her, and then looked at Kong Qingming who was next to Long Qingying. He was like a sticky candy, following her even when she went to the washroom. Thinking of Long Qingying slashing him with a katana with a black face, Lin Wenwen smiled. Why were all the men in High City chasing after someone like this? Did they learn this from that guy Wu Qingyue? But this Kong Qingming was much more shameless than Wu Qingyue. Although he had a beautiful face, he didn't expect his nature to be so ruffian. But looking at his good friend's face, although she was resisting, her eyes were a little confused. Lin Wenwen felt that if this Kong Qingming was a little more clingy, there would still be a chance. It seemed that Kong Qingming's timely risking his life to save her made her very confused. Lin Wenwen felt that Kong Qingming was so serious. Handing Long Qingying over to him was actually not a bad thing. Li Yueshan moved closer to Lin Wenwen and asked her curiously, How long do you think it will take for your best friend to surrender? Lin Wenwen glanced at him, a little disdainful. You seem to be very unwilling for Kong Qingming to chase after someone. Are you jealous? Li Yueshan looked at her in surprise. That's right, I just don't like to be abused, okay? You, on the other hand, look like you want to matchmake them. Lin Wenwen said. What's wrong with that? If he really loves my Qingqing, I don't have any objections if he won't bully my Qingqing. Also, Qingqing needs a man to accompany her. She always follows me alone. It's hard for me to abandon her and find someone else to date. Li Yueshan. Do you think she's a hindrance? Lin Wenwen shrugged and didn't say anything. Chapter 1041. The appearance of Qiu Lili and Lin Kuei made Lin Wenwen and the others feel relieved. The situation had suddenly changed. The people who were running for their lives had now become the hunters. Ah, Miss Lily didn't let us do anything. But since they made such a big scene, there shouldn't be any fish that slipped through the net. Yi Qingxian raised her head slightly and looked at the 5 huge tornadoes spinning and twisting as she murmured. Emo stood next to him with a cold face and ignored him. Lin Wenwen said, I don't think so. Lily is very strong. Li Yueshan said, there's still enough time. As long as we can leave tonight, we will return to the base tomorrow. Lin Wenwen's eyes lit up and said, how about it? Have you seen our leader's baby? Who does it look like? Li Yueshan's expression was a little strange. He touched his chin and pondered for a few seconds before looking at her and asking, well, have you seen a newborn baby that can talk? Therefore, in Lin Wenwen's mind, there was a picture of a newborn baby who was covered in blood and whose arms and legs were curled up. The baby opened his mouth and spoke. She shuddered inexplicably. The scene was a little scary. Seeing Lin Wenwen's strange expression, Li Yueshan smirked. Did you think of something bad? In fact, the baby is very cute. He has big eyes, is short and vigorous, and is not afraid of anything. Every day, he will argue with your leader. If he can't win, he will roll on the ground and act like a spoiled child. Therefore, Lin Wenwen subconsciously imagined the faces of babies crying with their mouths wide open. It was like a devil's voice penetrating the brain. She laughed. Then our leader will be angered to death by him. However, since our leader agreed to let your leader hold the full moon banquet in Sea City, does that mean there's progress in their relationship? Li Yueshan shook his head. No, your leader didn't agree. It's just that the other 2 leaders in Sea City planned to steal the baby from the base. Lin Wenwen stared at him with a strange expression. Steal the baby? I can't believe those 2 men could think of something like this. Although the others were sitting idly on the side, they were all listening attentively. Everyone present were either level 5 or level 6 metahumans or zombies. Their hearing was able to pick up sounds from hundreds of meters away. Therefore, Kong Qingming interjected at this time. He probably thought that Chief Wu couldn't handle your Chief Lu. So he came up with this idea. Long Qingying silently turned her head and glanced at him, her eyes filled with disdain. It was as if he was looking down on the people of Sea City for not doing proper work. Why are you looking at me like that? I'm such an open and above-board person. How could I do that kind of thing? Kong Qingming immediately felt unhappy. Humph. Long Qingying snorted coldly. She swung the back of her head and swept her long, vertical ponytail across his face. She didn't know who was the one who wanted to lock her up yesterday and not let her go anywhere. At this moment, Lin Kuei, who had been silent all this while, suddenly said in a hoarse voice, It's almost time to go back. When everyone turned their heads, they discovered that the fire tornadoes had already disappeared. In the sky, 2 figures quickly flew towards them. Done. The bugs have all been burned, let's go back. Qiu Lili landed lightly on the ground and said to everyone who was waiting for them. Then, everyone immediately got into the car. Li Yueshan drove 2 off-road vehicles and the car that he had stolen from the people of Wuxia. It was enough for them to go back. Just after Qiu Lili and the others left, the huge surface of Lake Tai suddenly surged. It seemed that there was a large amount of violent activity underwater, causing the surface of the water to be unstable. Then, half an hour later, the water around Lake Tai which covered an area of more than 2,000 square kilometers, began to fluctuate. Giant beasts began to climb out of the water. Most of these beasts were still munching on the mutant fish in the lake. They looked like lizards and crocodiles, but there were horns on their heads. The bigger ones were the size of water buffaloes, and the smallest ones were the size of domestic pigs. They had 4 thick legs, but their bodies were slender. Their tails were very short, and their claws were very sharp. They were very agile when they crawled, and they quickly rushed up to the shore. However, after these things climbed up, they did not go too far. After moving around the area within 200 meters of the shore, he returned to the lake and dived back into the water. Then, the surface of the lake became quiet again. Far away in the Wuxia base in the north, Sikong-chun appeared in a secret underground base. He walked through a large door, and the heavy alloy door automatically closed behind him. Sikong-chun looked up, and in front of him was a huge mechanical space. He was standing on a platform that was 3 stories high, and the space in front of him was at least 150 meters high. Below it, there were countless neatly stacked large glass boxes. The space was divided into many areas, and each area had neatly arranged tempered glass boxes of different sizes. In the boxes, there were all kinds of mutant beasts and a large number of zombies. Countless people wearing white protective suits were walking around in this underground space, controlling the machines or standing beside the glass boxes to record something. Leader. Seeing Sikong Li appear, the person in charge immediately appeared in front of him. How's the research progress? Any breakthroughs? Sikong-chun looked at him and asked. The person in charge was a beautiful woman wearing a white research robe. Her long hair was tied behind her head, and she wore a pair of glasses on her clean and white face. She turned her head to look at the scene below, shook her head and said, "The amount of medicine cannot control their consciousness. A little bit won't be able to control their consciousness, and a little bit more won't be able to control their consciousness, but a little bit more will make them explode. I keep feeling that our medicine is missing something. If we don't find the diary that he took away, we don't know how long it will take for us to research it. Only by finding his diary can we find a solution as soon as possible." Sikong-chun looked at her with some dissatisfaction. "Do we have to find his diary? If you don't hurry up, the American and Japanese research teams will laugh at us for being inferior to them." He didn't want the foreign people to look down on him, and he had already found all the famous researchers in the country. But they couldn't find a solution, and now they had to put their hope on the 2 diaries. This was not his style. Our technology has always been a step behind the American, and there is nothing we can do about it. I have tried many kinds of special energy, but I can't reach this level of compatibility. Now we can only continue to experiment to find the energy with the highest compatibility. The woman's expression was calm as she pushed up the glasses on the bridge of her nose. Chapter 1042. For the time being, no one knew that a group of exotic beasts had suddenly climbed ashore and returned to the lake, and that the major bases were secretly plotting something. When Lin Xiao returned to Wu Qingyue's house with the diary given by Jiang Anan, he sat on the sofa in the living room and flipped through it. For children were playing on the carpet in the living room and on the sofa. Wu sat on the sofa on the other side, holding a document in his hand. As soon as Xiao Yunlong and Meng Yu came in, they saw 2 adults sitting on one side, either looking at documents or notes. Several children were playing on the floor and on the sofa. In fact, there were 3 older children sitting on the sofa. Only little Tung Tung was crawling on the carpet in a black and white panda costume. "Is this child Little Ting?" "Hello, Little Tung. I'm Meng Yu. You can call me Aunt Yu." Meng Yu came in and saw little Tung Tung crawling on the carpet with short arms and legs, and immediately came over. She stretched out her arms to hug him. As a result, little Tung Tung turned around and climbed onto the sofa with a whoosh. He turned his head and stared at her without making a sound. The sequence of movements was not at all like that of a baby of his age. In order to make it convenient for the children to play in the living room, Wu Qingyue had moved the coffee table in front of the sofa to a corner, so the empty space in front of the sofa was left empty. Xiao Yunlong came in and saw Meng Yu's disappointed look. he said to little Tung Tung. Little brat, don't pretend, little you knows about you. When little Tung Tung heard this, he immediately pointed his short finger at him and said angrily, You traitor! How can you betray my information? Xiao Yunlong walked over with his long legs, stretched out his arms and quickly hugged him before he was about to crawl away. He said with a smile, What betray? Yu is one of us, she won't tell anyone about you. Don't be afraid. When the two arrived, Wu Chunyue and Lin Xiao both raised their eyes. Meng Yu also came to his side and looked at him curiously. Then she reached out and poked his little face. You really know how to talk. It looks like you don't know how to walk yet, but you crawl so fast. It shouldn't take long for you to stand up and walk, right? Moreover, the tone of the child's voice didn't sound like that of a child. Meng Yu turned to look at Lin Xiao, and then at Wu Chunyue. His eyes darkened slightly. These two people. No, how did this man and corpse do it? Not only did she give birth to a child that was crawling around, but the child's performance was also so magical. No wonder Brother Yu was so obsessed with this female zombie. Was it because he already had a child? Could it be? What about that time? But the last time they had sex was in July last year, and it was already October now. It was born last month. Do zombies need 15 months to give birth? It's been so long. Lin Xiao didn't miss Meng Yu's gaze. His heart moved slightly, and he sensed her thoughts. Seeing that the other party was just purely curious and puzzled, and didn't have any negative or dark emotions, he ignored her. By the way, the table and chairs are ready. Who are you going to find to be your assistant chef? Xiao Yunlong, while holding Tung Ting's soft body, suddenly turned to look at Wu Chunyue and asked, Wait for Qing Ming to come back, and Li Cheng will also help. Wu Chunyue looked at his watch. It was already 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he should go cook. So he got up and walked toward the kitchen. I don't know if Qing Ming can make it back tomorrow. Xiao Yunlong said uncertainly. If he can't make it back, I won't let him go to the All Beings base to see Miss Qing. Wu Chunyue didn't look back, and casually threw out a sentence before entering the kitchen. Xiao Yunlong. You're really ruthless. Put me down, your body is so hard. It's not comfortable to hold. I want Aunt Yu to hold me. At this time, Tung Ting began to kick and clap his hands on his arm. Yo, you're really quick. Just now you were hiding from me, and now you want me to hold you? Xiao Yunlong looked down in disdain. Isn't it because your muscles are too hard? Don't talk nonsense, quickly put me down. Tung Ting disdainfully looked at him. Xiao Yunlong, who was despised for his muscles being too hard, stared at him for 3 seconds before saying, If you don't like it, I don't want you to like it anyway. My name is Yu. It's fine if she likes it. As soon as he finished, he was reprimanded by Meng Yu. Hey, what are you saying in front of a child? Meng Yu said as she took Ting Ting from Xiao Yunlong's hands. He is an impure child. Don't be fooled by his appearance. Xiao Yunlong looked at Meng Yu with some grievance. After all, this kid was talking nonsense in front of everyone yesterday for tomorrow's banquet. Wu Chunyue had already sent people to prepare the tables and chairs, as well as wine, dishes, meat and fruits. Of course, most of the fresh food was provided by Lin Xiao. The list of people participating in the banquet included a bunch of people on Lin Xiao's side, and a bunch of people on Shanghai's side. To eat a meal, at least 5 tables had to be set up. After dinner in the evening, Wu Chunyue began to sort out the menu for tomorrow in the kitchen in advance, preparing the things that could be prepared in advance. The things that could not be prepared would be done tomorrow during the day. In any case, they would only be seated in the evening. After Lin Xiao coaxed the few little ones back to her room, she sat on the sofa and continued to look through the diary given by Jiang Anan. From time to time, she would unconsciously turn her head to look at the situation in the kitchen when she heard the sounds coming from the kitchen. Why did this man have such a serious expression every time he entered the kitchen? He was usually smiling, but after he entered the kitchen he never smiled. Watching him bustling in and out, he took out some melons and beans that could be stored overnight. Then he took out some dried vegetables that needed to be soaked, and soaked them in several pots. A serious man was really charming. A handsome face, bright eyes, and a serious expression. A slender and strong figure. Lin Xiao's mind shook fiercely. She quickly regained her composure and pulled her gaze back to the notebook in her hand. Then she couldn't help sighing, feeling that she was in a bad situation. She didn't know how long she had been looking at it, but a hand suddenly reached out and took away her notebook. "You have been staring at this page for 10 minutes. What are you thinking about? You didn't even react when I approached you?" Wu Qingyue sat down next to her, looking at the contents of the diary that she had just read, but his mouth asked. Lin Xiao watched him naturally sit down next to her. Well, he was sitting on the sofa armrest, and he was actually sitting next to her. A wave of warmth came from his body, and Lin Xiao suddenly came to her senses. Her expression changed slightly, and then she replied calmly, "I was thinking about whether there was anything that could restrain those underground creatures." Chapter 1043. Of course there is. Isn't sunlight their nemesis? Wu Qingyue said with a smile. What about at night? Lin Xiao turned her head and glanced at him. Why was he leaning so close to her? There was an empty seat next to him, but he didn't want to sit. She thought about it and felt that she didn't want Wu Qingyue to interfere, so she raised her palm and said, "Forget it, I will think of a way." The meaning of her words was clearly telling him not to interfere in her affairs. Since her ability could devour the energy of those creatures from within, she felt that something poisonous might have an effect. She also decided that after Xiaoteng's full moon, she would personally capture a few living underground creatures to experiment on. She didn't believe that she couldn't find any weaknesses other than their fear of sunlight. Wu Qingyue shrugged and returned the notebook to her with a smile. His sleeves were still rolled up to his elbows because he was busy in the kitchen. He extended his muscular arm in front of Lin Xiao, and his healthy, tan skin made her want to touch it. "Do you feel that your ability is recovering very quickly these 2 days?" Wu Qingyue suddenly asked when he saw her take the notebook. Lin Xiao was about to stand up and sit on the other side, because the man obviously didn't want to get up. Hearing his words, she subconsciously paused, then turned her head in confusion, and raised her chin slightly to look at him in confusion. Hearing what he said, Lin Xiao had indeed found out about this matter. She noticed it when she absorbed the zombie cores last night. Usually, she could only absorb about 10 level 4 or level 4 zombie cores, or energy crystals in a night. After she was pregnant with Xiaoteng, her absorption was even slower. She could only absorb 5 or 6 in a night, and most of the energy was absorbed by Xiaoteng. However, she absorbed 30 last night. The speed was fast, and the stored energy had recovered to about 80%. This situation didn't happen in the month after she gave birth to Xiaoteng. It only happened in the past 2 days. At first, Lin Xiao didn't understand what was going on. In the past 2 days, besides absorbing the energy and flesh of 10 level 7 underground creatures, she had sex with Wu Qingyue for a night. She didn't know where this opportunity came from, but when she heard Wu Qingyue's sudden question, Lin Xiao faintly had a premonition that she didn't want to believe. "Don't tell me, he's also in the same situation?" Seeing that Lin Xiao's eyes were flickering, Wu Qingyue's lips curled up even more. She smiled subtly and said, "It seems like you've thought of something. What do you think happened between the two of us? It seems like doing this kind of thing is very good for us." Xiao Lin. Come to think of it, the previous 2 times when the two of them had a reaction was actually because of her. For the first time, most of her body's functions were activated, and the strange touch on her body seemed to have turned on some kind of switch. Then Little Man changed her form, and the second time, it didn't take long for Little Man to be born. Not to mention the previous 2 changes, Lin Xiao could feel his energy erupting in her body during the few times the night before yesterday. At that time, her consciousness was a bit fuzzy, so she didn't notice it. Now that she thought about it, there seemed to be a subtle feeling of something being extracted. Lin Xiao's mind seemed to have opened a hole. She thought about the 3 times they had sex, and there were obvious changes in her body. Oh, that's not right. Lin Xiao remembered that when this man had sex with her for the first time, his ability was still at level 7, although he was on the verge of breaking through at that time. But after being tricked by little man, it didn't take long for him to show the strength of a level 8 metahuman. Then Wu Qinghua crossed his arms and leaned against the back of the sofa. He continued to smile and said, I broke through to level 8 because I was tricked by Little Tongue last year and broke through the shackles. And you seem to have improved a lot. How is it? Do you have any changes this time? Lin Xiao retracted her gaze and said, So? What do you want to say? She didn't directly answer his question, but she had already given the answer indirectly, and her attitude was a bit ambiguous. Wu Qinghua's eyes lit up, and then his gaze became deep. Suddenly, he stretched out his finger and gently touched her ear. Lin Xiao's whole body trembled, and then she stood up abruptly. In an instant, she flashed 2 meters away and turned around to glare at him. What are you doing? He dared to touch her. He really wanted a foot after giving her an inch. Wu Qinghua looked at her meaningfully, and his eyes flickered faintly. He opened his mouth and said with a chuckle, What are you nervous about? I don't plan to do anything. Lin Xiao stared at him coldly and pursed her lips. Then she coldly snorted and turned to walk to the stairs with her notebook. It's getting late, Leader Wu, rest early. As soon as she walked to the stairs, she saw a shadow moving at the end of the stairs. She immediately rolled her eyes and raised her legs to walk up. These two brats, did they think that her nose was a decoration? Couldn't they smell them? Lin Xiaolu sneaked back to her room with little Tungting in her arms, and then immediately threw little Tungting onto the bed. She also climbed up neatly and pulled the quilt over her. She pretended to be asleep. After a while, Lin Xiao opened the door of their room and stood at the door to look at the situation on the bed inside. She walked over and pulled the quilt for Tong Tong, who had rolled to the side. Seeing that the 4 children's bodies were not exposed outside the quilt, she turned around and walked out. As soon as she closed the door, the room became dark. Little Tongting and Lin Xiaolu, who had been pretending to be asleep, sat up. Well, Papa is too lame. There are still 2 nights left, tonight and tomorrow night. If you don't hurry up, Mama will leave again. Little Tungting whispered with a sad face, holding his arms. Lin Xiaolu also sat up and said to him, Why do you always care so much about adults' affairs? Go to sleep. Don't go back on your promise. This boy promised to let her take him out to eavesdrop on the conversation between the 2 adults, and then go to sleep obediently when he came back. Tut! Your father and mother live together. Of course you don't understand the feeling of running at both ends. In 2 days, Mama will go back again, even if I want to stay. She will agree, but she will definitely leave me here for a long time. Maybe she will be very happy. Little Tungting said with a face full of dissatisfaction. How do you know that Aunt will be very happy? Lin Xiaolu asked doubtfully. I know my mama's thoughts the best. Look at her face now. She doesn't want to see me. She must think that I am usually too noisy, making her unable to work in peace. Little Tungting said with his eyes shining in the dark, with an expression that he understood everything. Chapter 1044. Hearing what Little Tungting said, Lin Xiaolu also felt a little sorry for him. Oh, well, adults will deal with their own affairs anyway. You little boy, don't worry about it, lie down and sleep for me. Saying that, she pressed Little Tungting's body down and covered him with the quilt. Little Tungting kicked his legs. I can't sleep. You have to lie down even if you can't sleep. Who asked you to sleep so much during the day? Lin Xiaolu was actually a little tired. Little Tungting blinked his eyes and looked at the ceiling. In fact, his vision at night was also very strong. Because of his physique, there was not only the zombie virus in his body, but also his 5 senses were strengthened at the same time. His ears could hear very far, his eyes were very sharp at night, and his nose could smell a lot of smells. Listening to the breathing of the other 3 children in the room, in order to make it convenient for them to sleep together, Wu Qinghua prepared a large bed of 1.5 meters long for them, so that they would not feel crowded. Wu Yueling was now willing to play with them and sleep with them. And these days, little Lingling's mentality was also a lot more cheerful. So Wu Qinghua did not object to her sleeping with the other 3 children. But at night, he would come to take a look at the sleeping posture of the children from time to time, and help them with the quilt and so on. Little Tungting thought of the conversation between Lin Xiao and Wu Qingyu had just heard, and then showed a trace of a proud smile. Of course, he knew what was going on. The energy lake in his mama's space could not only cure the zombie virus, but also cure and repair such a simple thing. The first time they did it with his help at the bottom of the lake, their bodies were actually transformed by the energy in the lake. Not only his mama's body had changed, but his papa's body had also changed. Otherwise, how could it be so quiet during the 2 times of madness? It would have been noisy long ago. However, his papa and mama didn't seem to know about this. If the 2 of them did that thing more often, it would be very helpful for his mama's breakthrough. Of course, his papa would also benefit a lot. Turning his head to look at Lin Xiaolu, he didn't know that she was already asleep. Little Tingting's pair of black eyes rolled in the night. Papa would definitely drink a lot of wine at his full moon party tomorrow night. He had to put something in the wine. He saw that Mama was always looking at Papa in a daze these 2 days. In fact, Mama had already begun to care about Papa. As their good son, Little Tungting felt that he had the obligation to help them. Anyway, if his mama wanted to beat him, he would hide in Papa's house, ha 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 ha. Lin Xiao, who didn't know that his son was going to cheat him again, went back to his room and directly entered the space. He collected some lake water and took a bath in the room in the small building. Thinking about Wu Qingyue's words just now, what was he trying to express? Even if he knew that the union between the 2 of them was beneficial to their bodies, could it be that he still wanted to use this as a reason to do something to her? Anyway, she knew that the other party was always smiling, but in fact he was coveting her body. Don't think that she couldn't see the hidden desire in his eyes. Wu Qingyue smiled helplessly as he watched Lin Xiao walk up the stairs. After tidying up the first floor, he turned around and went upstairs. When he went upstairs, he felt that Lin Xiao's breath had disappeared. He guessed that she might have entered the space. Leaving her alone, he walked to Little Tingting's room and opened the door. The 4 children were all lying in bed, covered with quilts and sleeping soundly. Then he gently stepped back, closed the door, and walked to his study. Lin Xiao took a bath in the lake water for 2 hours, and then walked out with her head wet. After getting dressed, she picked up a dry towel and went downstairs while wiping her head. There was a figure standing at the door. It seemed that she wanted to come in, but was hesitant. "Mom, do you remember?" Lin Xiao walked over and pulled the figure in. Mrs. Lin looked at her blankly with a pair of zombie-like eyes. She shook her head and then nodded. Lin Xiao pulled her to sit down and then smiled. "You mean you remember something, but you don't know me, right?" Recently, Mrs. Lin had been staying in her space. After being transformed by her blood, her memory recovered very slowly. Maybe because of the second outbreak of the virus, her body became more resistant to the energy of Lin Xiao's blood. She only regained some of her memory, and there were still some things she couldn't remember. Lin Xiao sat opposite to her and said, "I am your daughter, Lin Xiao, and you have a grandson. He will be 1 month old tomorrow, and I will bring him here to see you." Mrs. Lin stared at her with her zombie-like eyes, shocked and confused. She remembered her eldest daughter, and of course, she also remembered what her daughter looked like. But it seemed that she forgot something. Anyway, no matter what she forgot, her eldest daughter didn't look like this. She was so young, and she became a zombie. Lin Xiao looked at her helplessly and said, "You seem to remember the past, but you forgot the recent things." Mrs. Lin nods confusedly and agrees with Lin. The pressure from Lin Xiao was so strong that she didn't dare to get close to her. She already knew that she had become a zombie, and in this gray space where there was no distinction between day and night, there were other zombies besides her. Mrs. Lin didn't know what to say. Lin Xiao calling her mom was familiar, but her face was strange. She didn't believe what Lin Xiao said, but she couldn't be sure. She looked at Lin Xiao, opened her mouth, and said something silently. Lin Xiao didn't need to look at her mouth to know what she was thinking. She replied, "Lin Feng and the others are fine, and so is Lu. When we get back to the base, I will take you out, but the place you will live is not on the human side." As she spoke, she stood up and walked outside. In the open space in front of the building, Mo Yen and the female zombie in the white dress were standing together, looking at her. Lin Xiao stood at the door with her arms crossed. She looked at the female zombie and said to Mo Yen, "She is about to break through. If she reaches the 6th level, the recovery speed of your zombie core will be much faster." Mo Yen nodded. The black lines on his face had thinned a lot. His facial features and handsome face were revealed, and the evil smile on his face was faintly discernible. The female zombie spent most of her time healing him, and he was soaking in the energy lake in this space. More than half of the cracks on Mo Yan's zombie core had disappeared. Lin Xiao narrowed his eyes and looked at his head, estimating the speed of his recovery. It would take another 3 months or so for the cracks on his corpse core to completely disappear. At that time, his ability would gradually recover. Mo Yan's eyes darkened when Lin Xiao stared at his zombie core. It was not a good feeling. It was as if someone had locked onto his life. Fortunately, Lin Xiao didn't show any malice, so Mo Yan could bear it. Chapter 1045. Hurry up and recover. Your lightning element can help a lot. Unfortunately, you can't do it now. Lin Xiao looked at him and sighed helplessly. If his lightning element recovered, he wouldn't need Wu Qingyue's help. It would be good to have someone who could deal with the underground creatures there. Unlike Elmar and the others who couldn't do anything to the underground creatures, causing heavy casualties like the night before yesterday. Mo Yin didn't know about the situation outside. Hearing Lin Xiao's words, he looked at her in surprise, feeling that the situation wasn't good. Otherwise this female zombie wouldn't say that to him. Lin Xiao still had a towel hanging on her neck. She raised her hand and rubbed it. She waved at Mo Yen and flashed out of the space. Standing on the table, she wiped the surface of the table with her palm. A pile of shining zombie cores and energy cores appeared on the table. There weren't many, ranging from level 4 to level 6. Lin Xiao roughly looked at it. There were less than 50 cores left. He didn't know if he would be able to recover his ability if he absorbed another one tonight. After sorting them, he looked at the number of zombie cores of each level. There were only 3 level 6 cores left. There were still a lot of level 5 and 4 cores. After putting away all the zombie cores, Lin Xiao tilted her head and rubbed her hair. After rubbing her hair until it was half dry, she didn't blow on it. She just sat on the bed and started to absorb the zombie cores. The next day, Wu Qingyue woke up early in the morning before the sun rose. And soon someone came to help. After Xiao Liqing arrived, he went straight to the living room and found the kitchen. Sure enough, his leader had already opened the pot and prepared some of the dishes that would take a long time to stew. He was about to start stewing. She was also making breakfast. There was a pile of flour at the side, ready to be kneaded. "You're here? Is there still no news from Yushan and the others?" Wu Qingyue was squatting under the cabinet. He heard footsteps and turned to look. Then he lowered his head and continued what he was doing. "They'll be back soon, don't worry, I'll make it." After Xiao Liqing came in, he stood at the side and asked, "What am I doing?" Wu Qingyue said, "Kneading dough." "Oh, this dough was probably going to be used to steam buns or make dumplings." Xiao Liqing consciously started to look for tools. Lin Xiao came down with a few children and a big fat rabbit. "Hey, is that rabbit edible? If it's edible, let's cook it too. Braised rabbit meat." Xiao Liqing joked when he saw the big fat, gray rabbit jumping into the restaurant. Hearing this, Wu Yueling immediately ran over, holding the rabbit and looking at him with a vigilant face. "Lingling, you're awake. Did you sleep well last night?" Xiao Liqing greeted her with a smile. His joke just now was actually to get her to come over. Wu Yueling glared at him, then turned around and ran away. "Where are you going?" "Time for breakfast." Wu Qingyue was carrying a big bowl of noodles when he saw his baby running away. He immediately said, "Good morning, Uncle Wu, Uncle Xiao." "Good morning, Uncle Wu, Uncle Xiao." Lin Xiaolu and Tong Tong obediently greeted Wu Qingyue and Xiao Liqing. "Morning, sit down and have breakfast." Wu Qingyue smiled and nodded to the two children. Tungting was carried by Lin Xiaolu as he stretched his neck to look at the breakfast on the table. He sighed, "Ah, why haven't I grown teeth yet? I want to eat those too." Wait a little longer. I heard that babies usually grow teeth at 6 months old. You still have to wait a few more months. Seeing Tungting looking at the table with a greedy and resentful face, Lin Xiaolu laughed and said to him, "Eat your porridge. They make different kinds of porridge for you every day. Isn't it delicious?" Lin Xiao glanced at her son coldly. "But I want to eat something else. I can only look at the delicious food all day, but I can't eat it. I can't eat it even when it smells good. I can't eat it even when it looks good. You don't understand my pain. You don't understand my feelings at all. Is there a mother like you?" Tungting angrily rebuked his own mother. Lin Xiao was unmoved and said to him, "You're not sleeping and running around in the middle of the night. Whose baby would run around like you when it's just a month old?" This brat hid and eavesdropped on their conversation last night. She didn't even teach him a lesson. How dare he question her? Hearing this, Tungting immediately looked up at the ceiling and didn't say anything. But after thinking for a while, he suddenly looked at Lin Xiao and said, "Am I a normal child? I'm a child prodigy. I can't be compared to a normal child." "Lin Xiao, why is there a layer of cement on your face?" "It was thick and hard." As she said this, she took Tingting from Lin Xiaolu's arms and sat on his seat. She used her hands to pinch the flesh on his little face. "Wah wah wah, it hurts so much. Are you still my real mother? You're so heavy-handed." Tungting cried out in pain. Xiao Liqing took a bowl of noodles for Tongtong next to him and said with a smile, "It's so lively with children in the morning. Unlike us single people who wake up in the morning, it's so miserable." Wu Qingyue was also taking noodles for Wu Yueling. Hearing this, he glanced at him with a smile and said, "Then hurry up and find one. It's useless to be envious." Xiao Liqing shrugged and said, "I haven't met one yet. Let's just muddle through." "You still want to wait for one? Don't you know how many girls there are now? When you meet one, she'll already be someone else's." Lin Xiao couldn't help but stab him in the back. Xiao Liqing. His heart was so tired. Could she not tell him this cruel fact? At this time, Tungting stretched out his head from Lin Xiao's arms and looked at Xiao Liqing with his eyes and said, "Uncle Xiao, what do you think of my Auntie Duan? Do you need my help?" "Pa, don't mess around." Lin Xiao slapped his bald head. "Ah, can you be more gentle? Stepmother." Tingting's face was pinched by her just now, and now she hit his head. He immediately glared at her with a pair of tearful eyes. "Pa," Lin Xiao sneered and pinched his ear and said, "How dare you call me stepmother? Who worked so hard to give birth to you? You little bastard." "Wawawa, Papa, save me. Mama mistreated me." Seeing Lin Xiao pinching his ear, Tungting immediately surrendered. He struggled to free his hands and feet and asked Wu Qingyue for help. Xiao Liqing looked at him with a speechless smile. "The Auntie Duan you're talking about can't be Duan Wan, right? Well, I don't get along with her." Although he said that, Xiao Liqing didn't realize that his eyes were a little fluttering. Wu Qingyue glanced at him and then looked at Tungting with a smile. He said, "Oh, put out the fire you lit yourself. Remember not to call others for help in the future." Tungting immediately became quiet. He angrily opened his mouth and ate the spoonful of porridge that Lin Xiao just brought over. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.